Hogwarts Summoning Manual. Chapter 1. Traveling to the Wizarding World. Half asleep and half awake, Bylin felt a pain in his forehead, and a gentle neutral voice came to mind. Host Muggle physique detected. Bloodline correction is in progress, the correction rate is 35%, it is recommended to activate the Auxiliary Magic Power Conversion System. Automatically obtain the Auxiliary Magic Power Conversion System Fantastic Beast Summoning Illustrated Book. The host can query the user guide of the illustrated book by itself. Bylin felt as if his forehead was stamped with a branding iron, and he couldn't help screaming. When he woke up from his dream, he heard an old voice, Episki. Spell, healing as before. It didn't work. The old voice said in surprise. Oh. Old George, your fingers are trembling, the magic is no longer working, I'll do it, this poor child, Enavit, spell, quick recovery. Another old woman's voice said. Ah ha ha ha, my dear, who was laughing at the shaking of wise George's hands just now. Egu amenti, spell, clear water like a spring. Old George shouted the spell again. A basin of cold water was poured on Bylin's head, which made Bylin completely awake, and the scorching forehead seemed to have eased a lot, and he sat up straight. He was sitting on the platform of a very retro train station, surrounded by many people, most of whom were 2 or 3 meters away, pointing at him, while an old couple was kneeling and sitting beside him. It doesn't matter if you look at it, Bylin was stunned by the scene in front of him. Like the people around them, the old couple looked like typical English people. They were probably in their 70s. They were wearing strange robes, and they each held an old black wand in their hands. Pointing to his face, Bylin suddenly remembered that he was originally a first-year biology student in Xiaguo. He had just taken the train to travel around the country with his savings from a 1-year work-study program during the summer vacation. In a remote small train station, I saw a teenage girl playing on the platform, but accidentally fell down. At this time, a green leather train was only 100 meters away from the platform. In desperation, Bylin jumped off the platform and managed to save the little girl, but he was scraped by the train and hit his head on the sharp corner of the platform. When he saw the corner of the platform, there was a black cat. After looking at himself with deep eyes, Bylin lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found that he was no longer at that remote train station. After repeated confirmations, Bylin realized that he was actually at platform 9 3/4 of London King's Cross Station in 1993. Unique world. Bylin almost fainted again, but thinking of what spell the old couple would cast next time, he quickly stood up with a carp. By the way, even though Bylin is just an ordinary poor student with a second education degree, he has inherited martial arts from his family, and his skills are quite good. The train also stopped slowly at this time, and Bylin saw his own appearance on the glass of the train. His face was still the same handsome face, but his hair turned brown, and what was even more bizarre was that he looked like Harry Potter. The lightning-shaped scar on his forehead, and he also has a scar on his forehead, where he just felt scalded by a soldering iron, but the shape turned out to be a cute cat's claw. Thanks again and again to the old couple who rescued him, Bylin boarded the train according to the ticket pinned in his chest pocket, and tidied up his thoughts. For unknown reasons, the self who should have hit his head and died was reborn in the world of Harry Potter, and he also got a thing called the Summoning Book of Fantastic Beasts. As long as Bylin strokes the scar on his forehead, a ghost will appear, a thick ancient tome with names written in strange goblin script. No one else can see this book, not even a very powerful wizard. Opening the first page, the guide to the summoning illustrated book appeared in Bylin's mind. There were a lot of blablas. 35/1 Jiangzi, what the hell is this 2%, so his body is naturally unable to carry a lot of magic power, so that unknown power gave him this ancient book. As long as Bylin subdue and seal all kinds of magic power recorded in the ancient book for such a magical creature, the ancient book can provide him with the corresponding magic power and skills. Opening the ancient book, there are densely packed various grey illustrated books, ranging from level 1 mandrakes to level 10 basilisks and fire dragons, and the second half is blank for Bylin to explore by himself. As for my identity in this world, I can see my work ID in my wallet at a glance. Kylan White Belan, Chinese, 20 years old, employed by the Department of Management and Control of Fantastic Beasts on the 4th floor of the British Ministry of Magic. Animal researcher, with a monthly salary of 100 galleons, about RMB 4700 at the time. And there is a note on the back of the work permit, which is a message from Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic of the United Kingdom. Keep an eye on Dumbledore and those weird teachers and students, and report to me if there is anything unusual, especially that the giant who always gets into trouble, I'm sick of him. In addition, I have paid you 2 months' salary, you'd better not let me down. Although the wallet was small, it was bulging enough to pour out hundreds of galleons of gold and a pile of sickles of silver, which was simply a huge sum of money. Bai Lin's bad mood because of being hit by a train suddenly improved. There is also the small suitcase that the kind old couple found for him, which contained his appointment letter. After Fudge took office, he began to have many opinions on the teaching of Hogwarts, such as the appointment of teachers. As a defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Quirrell turned out to be a Death Eater, actually a temporary Horcrux, and as a professor of protection of magical creatures, Hagrid didn't even graduate from Hogwarts, and he wasn't even allowed to use a wand. I have no qualifications to be a teacher at all. So Fudge appointed his distant nephew, I don't know where he went, Bai Lin, to Hogwarts as an assistant professor of protection of magical creatures, and as an undercover agent for the Ministry of Magic. What an obvious undercover. The train roared forward, and the beautiful scenery outside the window moved back quickly, but Bai Lin was not in the mood to watch, because he saw a line of information on the back of the illustrated book. Bai Lin, Strength 13, Magic Power 15, Evaluation, you are only slightly stronger than Muggles, or you are just a Muggle. Total score for completion of illustration book, 0, Magic Power bonus of illustration book, 0, Summoned Beast, 0, Magic Creature Affinity, +2. Bai Lin found that he could also see the attributes of other wizards on the train, an ordinary-looking and sloppy wizard who was reading the Daily Prophet, Strength 7, Magic Power 29. It should be because I have practiced martial arts since I was a child, and my strength is much stronger than that of ordinary wizards, but the magic power is not enough at all, because 12 is the dividing line between Muggles and wizards. At this time, a big black mouse was chasing a brown two-tailed squirrel and ran past him. The information of the two appeared in front of Bai Lin's eyes. They are both level 1 creatures, and they should be the pets of a certain wizard. Taking advantage of the fact that all the wizards on the train were reading newspapers or dozing off, Bai Lin took out his wand, aimed at the big black mouse, and cast a spell, Drowsed. There was a little smoke from the wand, and the spell failed, WTF. Bai Lin concentrated all his attention, and when the big black rat passed by his seat again, he cast another spell, and the big black rat was immediately hit and fell to the ground. Bai Lin quickly aimed at the big black rat lying on the ground with the summoning illustration book, and whispered, Seal. The summoning illustrated book suddenly emitted a faint blue light, and in a blink of an eye, the big black rat disappeared in a coma. On the level 1 creature in the illustrated book, the mouse column was partially lit, and the completion rate was 5%. It seemed that many mice had to be caught. Just the two fainted. Bai Lin felt a little lack of magic power. Just a few wizards came from the front compartment. The leader should be looking for pets, looked under each seat, and behind him, it was the old wizard named George. When he saw Bai Lin, couldn't help smiling, raised 2 beer glasses in his hand, and waved to Bai Lin. Chapter 2. The new teacher takes office. Old George is very talkative, and Bai Lin is also in need of a friend to teach him common sense about the wizarding world that he doesn't know. The two chatted while drinking mead. Old George was very interested in Bai Lin's position and salary in the Ministry of Magic. There was also a badge of the Ministry of Magic on Bai Lin's chest. After learning that he had 100 galleons a month, Old George became more enthusiastic and told Bai Lin that his daughter Catherine worked in a tailor shop in Hogsmeade. She just turned 19 this year. At the age of, Bai Lin felt that the topic had gone off the rails. The train slowly stopped at Hogsmeade station, and Bai Lin bid farewell to Old George. At this time, Old George was mostly drunk, and Bai Lin secretly stuffed 10 galleons in his pocket as a token of gratitude. It was the end of June, Hogwarts was on summer vacation, and the station was deserted, but Bai Lin soon saw the person who was obviously coming to pick him up. A meter-tall man in a moleskin coat. Half-blood giant Hagrid. Although his position is Hagrid's assistant professor, everyone can see that the assistant professor officially appointed by the Ministry of Magic has a much higher social status than Hagrid, a wild boy, so Hagrid attaches great importance to this and wants to work with him for a year. It is rare for a colleague to tidy up an old coat, but the messy hair and beard are still original. Because of the Chamber of Secrets incident, Hagrid was imprisoned in Azkaban for several weeks. At this time, he still looked haggard, but he cheered up. Seeing Bai Lin get off the car, he enthusiastically waved the pink umbrella in his hand. Bai Lin also enthusiastically waved to him, and greeted him with a small suitcase. To tell the truth, everyone who has read Harry Potter stories likes this silly-looking giant. His bravery, loyalty, and Bylin, who also likes small animals, is very moved by his love for small animals. Bylin shook hands with Hagrid kindly, and showed his work ID. Hagrid scratched his head and said, "Then, Mr. Kylan, are we going to school in the traditional way?" Bylin nodded and said, "Let's take the boat. I also want to see the famous Hogwarts scenery. Besides, we will be colleagues in the future. You can call me Ziobi, be kinder." Seeing that Bylin seemed to be easy to talk, Hagrid also relaxed a lot, and said with a naive smile, "As you wish, Your Excellency Kylan." "Oh no, Mr. Ziobi." Hagrid pulled out a small boat from the pier, lit an oil lamp on the bow, and drove Bylin to the ancient castle in the distance to the north. He pointed to the surrounding scenery and introduced to Bylin, "Where is the Hogwarts campus, where is the Quidditch training ground, where is the Forbidden Forest, and the small town of Hogsmeade behind the mountains in the distance?" However, Bylin was attracted by a black shadow at the far bottom of the lake. He quickly opened the summoning illustration book, until he reached the level 9 creature, only to see the figure of the Overlord Squid. "You mean?" Bylin always felt that Hogwarts was more like a huge Gothic church than an old castle, especially the huge banquet hall. Lin walked directly through the banquet hall and went straight upstairs to the principal's office. When walking through the large corridor, a man in black with half-opened eyes and an arrogant and displeased face came towards him, glanced sideways at Hagrid, and then turned his gaze to Bylin, that snake-like gaze. Seeing that Bylin felt uncomfortable all over, it was Snape Ben who was right. Bylin looked at his magic power curiously. 86, swallowed, he really deserved to be a half-blood prince. Hagrid, too, felt awkward, but greeted anyway, and Snape ignored him entirely. The three passed by, and Hagrid knocked on the door of the principal's office, and a very gentle old man's voice came from inside, "Is it Hagrid? Come in quickly. Everyone can hear it, let alone a powerful wizard." Bylin was a little excited to finally meet his childhood idol, the legendary wizard Albus Dumbledore. The principal's room was very dim, with only 2 light sources. One was the desk lamp on the large principal's desk, and the other was the phoenix fox glowing bright red on the shelf in the corner. "Aha, it seems that our new assistant professor is more interested in fox than I am, a bad old man." Dumbledore looked at Bylin mischievously from above the half-moon glasses, and put down the quill in his hand. "It can be seen that he is working hard to complete a certain work." Bylin did feel a strong magical power and a kind of sacred aura from Phoenix, and couldn't help but put down the suitcase in his hand, and stepped forward to reach Fox. It should be that Bylin's magic creature affinity +2 attribute took effect. Fox looked at him curiously, let him stroke its gorgeous feathers, and squinted his eyes comfortably. "Ah, we have a magical new teacher." Dumbledore was a little surprised and stood up. He was wearing a nightcap and gorgeous pajamas. His snow-white beard was 50 centimeters long, but he looked energetic and his eyes piercing. "And Dumbledore's mana is?" Fox screamed, flew onto Dumbledore's shoulder, and rubbed against his head. Bylin stepped forward and nodded in salute. "It's our first meeting, Mr. Dumbledore. I'm Bylin, and Kylan White is my English name. You can call me Ziobi." Dumbledore looked at this handsome and strong young man. His eyes were full of vitality, but there were some things that Dumbledore couldn't see through. It seemed that Bylin possessed energy far beyond the magic power in his body, but it was completely different from Moran. "Bye." Dumbledore looked at Fox and said, "Fox told me that it likes you very much. Phoenixes rarely recognize humans. It seems that Fudge recommended me an excellent teacher for the protection of magical creatures class." Bylin had already made a plan for himself on the way here. Now it is 1993, that is to say, Harry Potter's summer vacation at the end of his 2nd grade. During this summer vacation, a big event happened. Sirius Black escaped from prison. There is still 1 month left before the event. In his early days, he must improve his magic power this month in order to keep up with the pace of the plot and survive in this new world. Having made up his mind, Bylin said, "In addition to assisting Professor Hagrid in teaching, I also want to complete some research on magical creatures, collect specimens, and draw atlases during my tenure. I also ask Mr. Dumbledore to allow me to enter the forbidden area." "Forest." Dumbledore thought for a while, nodded and said, "Let Hagrid go with you. The Forbidden Forest is still dangerous, and those magical animals sometimes, of course, rarely, may have a bad temper, such as hippogriffs and thestrals," he said and gave Hagrid a meaningful look. Hagrid muttered, "Buckbeak and Weavue are very good. After chatting with Dumbledore for a while, Bylin couldn't wait to ask Hagrid to take him to the hunting ground. He knew that Hagrid had hidden a lot of good things. Although Dumbledore wanted to keep Bylin for dinner, Bylin was more interested in magical animals. After passing the greenhouse, Bylin saw the tall whomping willow from a distance. The evening breeze blew, and the whomping willow gently stretched its branches. Bylin secretly opened the illustration book and took a look. It was a proper level 6 creature, and his heart was silent. Including whomping willow in the itinerary, this thing is estimated to increase a lot of illustration points. Seeing that Bylin was fascinated by the whomping willow, Hagrid tilted his head and said, "If I were you, I wouldn't approach it easily, it hurts to hit people. Come this way, I'll let you see my good friend." Chapter 3. Start collecting fantastic creatures. Before reaching Hagrid's hut, Bylin saw a black shadow descending from the sky. Hagrid rushed up to meet it and blocked it between Bylin and Bylin. When Bylin saw it, it was the blue-white hippogriff with a black shadow on his body. Winged beast, referred to as hippogriff, Buckbeak. Buckbeak rubbed his head on Hagrid's chest affectionately, and Hagrid stroked its big head and said, "You're starving, I'll find you some fish to eat later." "Ah, I'm about to introduce." Bylin said, "Let me introduce myself." Bylin stepped forward, followed Xiaoguo's clasping ceremony, and bowed lightly. Buckbeak tilted his head and blinked, and bowed his head gracefully. Hagrid was very surprised and said, "Mr. Bai, you are so knowledgeable." Bylin couldn't help but rolled his eyes. "Isn't this what you want to teach the third graders?" Buckbeak is a good friend of Hagrid, Harry, and others, and even rescued Sirius. Although Bylin saw that it was a level 5 creature, he didn't want to seal it. Bylin took out a pack of snacks from the suitcase, a piece of salmon sushi, and generously fed it to Buckbeak. Hagrid was very happy that Bylin could make friends with Buckbeak, and Lien Chendeo would definitely invite Bylin later eat the best ham chose. Because he was Hagrid's assistant, Bylin did not choose to live in Hogwarts Castle, but planned to live in Hagrid's hut, but the moment he stepped into Hagrid's hut, he couldn't help feeling a little regretful. Hagrid's hut had only one room, but it was very spacious, with hams and pheasants hanging from the ceiling. Although it is summer, the fireplace is still warm, and there is a copper kettle on it. There is a huge wooden table and wooden chairs in front of the fireplace, and there is a large bed in the corner of the room, and the bed is a quilt made of rags. Hagrid's moleskin coat and crossbow in winter, some ingredients for making food, and things to be used in care of magical beasts were all piled up in the house. It's not that it's shabby, it's just that the smell of all kinds of strange food and materials fills the whole hut. Because Hagrid doesn't have a refrigerator, it makes people feel that it's really not a good place to sleep. Hagrid lit the fire, put the copper pot on the stand and said, "Please sit down freely, Mr. Bai, I'll let you taste my tea right away." Bylin laughed and said, "Don't forget that I'm from the Xia Kingdom, and tea is something carved in my soul." He took out a small iron box in the suitcase, which contained a strong aroma of black tea. "Besides, just call me Bai, I still have a lot of things to ask you, Hagrid." Hagrid sat down on the spacious chair and said, "I will help you. I haven't seen a wizard who treats magical animals as friendly as you for a long time. What is this called in the East? Friends, or hit it off?" "Mr. Hagrid, I hope we have a good time working together this year." "Well, I urgently need some biological specimens, so I made a list," Bylin said, taking out a bag from his pocket. A folded piece of paper was handed to Hagrid. When Hagrid heard the word specimen, he was a little nervous. If Bylin wanted to hurt a centaur, a unicorn, or a thestral, he would try his best to stop him. 20 mandrakes, 20 mice, 20 floor caterpillars, 20 polecats, Hagrid's favorite meat, and that's it. Hagrid was a little puzzled, not because these creatures are difficult, but because they are too simple. These are the ingredients of many potions, and they can be bought casually in Diagon Alley. Bylin smiled and said, "To be honest, I am imitating Master Newt, the protagonist of Where Are the Fantastic Beasts, and I am starting to build a new magical creature habitat. The work has just begun, and some basic creatures are needed to carry out habitat experiments." Hagrid was obviously interested, and said, "Has the Ministry of Magic finally taken action?" "I really..." Hagrid choked up a little. "Bylin. You are so big, yet so emotional." Bylin quickly took out 20 galleons, stuffed it into Hagrid's hand and said, "This is the startup fund for research. As the research progresses, the subsequent funds will be very rich." Hagrid's income was very low at Hogwarts, so even his favorite drink of mead is dependent on him taking prey to the bar in Hogsmeade, and the 20 galleons can be exchanged for 2 months of his drinking money. Hagrid patted his chest and agreed, and Balin stayed in Hagrid's hut. The next morning, before dawn, Hagrid went out in high spirits, and brought back 2 big cages at noon. A rat and a flow-green caterpillar, respectively. Balin didn't have so much magic power to faint one by one, but let Hagrid grab the small animals one by one, and then seal them directly. Balin also figured out the law of the seal. As long as the target magical creature loses its resistance, it can income directly into the illustrated book. In a blink of an eye, the illustrated book of the mouse and the green caterpillar of Flo lit up, and the display on the back of the illustrated book changed to total score of the illustrated book, 10, magic power bonus of the illustrated book, 1, summoned beast, 0, magic creature affinity, +2. His attributes were also adjusted to, Balin, strength 13, magic power 15, +1, evaluation, a muggle who can play a few tricks. Sure enough, the magic power added to the illustrated book was directly added to Balin's attributes. In the afternoon, he continued his efforts, and Hagrid got another 20 polecats and 20 mandrakes. However, when Hagrid handed over the polecats, Hagrid was quite reluctant, and Balin stuffed him with 5 galleons. Hagrid smiled happily. As for the mandrake, Hagrid wore big earplugs and put the mandrake in a big black cloth bag. It was tricky to deal with, because the silent spell had a very weak effect on the mandrake. Draco screamed at the same time, "I'm afraid the fire dragon couldn't stand it." Balin had been prepared for a long time, first plugged his ears tightly, and then put on winter earmuffs, and then used all his magic power to cast a mafia through. Close the earplugs, on himself and Hagrid finally, I couldn't hear anything at all. According to Balin's sign language, Hagrid grabbed the mandrakes out of the bag one by one, and Balin sealed them one by one. After working hard for half an hour, he finally dealt with the prey. Added a summoned beast, Mandela Scream, level 15, Balin said that the work is not in vain. At night, Hogwarts can be regarded as a bright starry sky with a bright and soft moon. This is a rare sight even in the wilderness in later generations. Balin glanced at the sea that had been asleep after a busy day. Took out a one-handed sword and a trapping net from Hagrid's weapon box, sneaked out of Hagrid's hut, and headed towards the Forbidden Forest alone. Tonight is the night of the full moon, and the werewolf deep in the Forbidden Forest will come out to hunt restlessly, and Balin is going to hunt a werewolf. Werewolves, level 3/7 creatures, powerful werewolves can tear apart lions and brown bears, bloody and violent, extremely dangerous. Although it's scary, but in the whole series of Harry Potter novels, there are werewolves in the Forbidden Forest, but I have never heard of werewolves in the Forbidden Forest hurting people. Hagrid even took the children to the Forbidden Forest. In class, it can be seen that werewolves in the Forbidden Forest are only low-level breeds around level 3, which belong to a relatively safe category. There are not many types of low-level creatures in the Forbidden Forest, and Balin is short on time. Increasing his magic power bit by bit may not reach the level of ordinary wizards by the time school starts, so he decided to give it a go, turning his bicycle into a motorcycle. Chapter 4. Werewolves. Balin holds a sword in his right hand, and a black walnut wand in his left, which is a free gift from his identity. It is impossible to say that he is not nervous. Werewolves are classic monsters that widely appear in various film and television works. Blood, brutality, madness. Just got into the dark forest, far away, a group of skinny thestrals, looking at the figure of Balin curiously. This kind of creature is relatively gentle, many of them have been tamed as mounts for wizards to pull carts. Directly it's not bad to ride, but it's a bit painful. The thestrals at Linzicao were all Hagrid's old acquaintances. Hagrid had named them each, and Hagrid would have found out if there was one less. Balin didn't want to make the big guy sad, so he walked non-stop deep into the Forbidden Forest. Balin does not have a map of the Forbidden Forest, and the distribution of various creatures is quite complicated. It may be difficult to find unicorns, centaurs, or giants, but werewolves are more obvious. The sound of howling wolves was a bit thicker than ordinary howling wolves, with a thirst for blood, and it often howled endlessly. After crossing a maple grove and crossing a river valley, the terrain was slightly higher. Balin memorized the terrain silently, and it was 7 or 8 kilometers away from Hagrid's hut. The oak trees more than 20 meters high are very dense. As soon as he stepped into the oak forest, the howling of wolves stopped, and Balin felt very clearly that he was being stared at by a few pairs of bloodthirsty eyes. Lin drew out his long sword, feeling a little ashamed. He didn't expect the werewolves in the Forbidden Forest to be so territorial. Could it be that they used infrared rays to set up a perimeter alarm? And what made him feel even more dangerous was that werewolves live in groups. Maybe they belonged to a large family or a village when they were human. Anyway, in the dark forest, several pairs of scarlet eyes lit up and gave off a faint red light. A black shadow rushed out from the bushes at an extremely fast speed. By the time Lin realized it, the black shadow was only more than 10 meters away from him. Lin was very agile. He rolled over to avoid the shadow, and Lin saw clearly that it was a werewolf with light brown fur. The werewolf in the world of Harry Potter is not like the image of a bear as strong as a bear in Underworld or Van Helsing, but as thin as a hungry dog in the wilderness, but the wolf's head is ferocious and ferocious. It is precisely because he has no size disadvantage that Lin dared to come to the Forbidden Forest alone. The werewolf roared and flew towards him, but what faced it was a sharp sword blade. Lin narrowly escaped the werewolf's fangs, but the sword did not cause any fatal injuries, it just made a cut on the werewolf's flank. Another 2 werewolves rushed out from the darkness and rushed towards Lin. This time, Lin learned to be smart. Holding a magic wand in his left hand, he said faint. In Chinese, to the werewolf rushing in front, a burst of magic power hit the werewolf head-on, and the werewolf seemed to be hit by a big stick with a smack on the forehead. He was hit so hard that stars stared at him, and he fell to the ground. The magic power added through the illustrated book can increase the power of magic. In desperation, Lin suddenly discovered that he can speak spells in Chinese. You must know that the spell system in the world of Harry Potter is very complicated. Wizards usually need years of practice to mobilize the magic power in their bodies through wrapping and obscure spells, and then release it through the wand. Lin's current situation is completely different as long as he knows the Chinese name of a certain spell. Usually very simple and easy to remember, as long as he has a magic wand in his hand, he can cast the spell. Knowing this, Lin was overjoyed. With such a convenient ability, he has not taken off in the same place in the Harry Potter world, and what restricts him is the magic attribute. At this time, the second werewolf had already swooped over. Lin shook his long sword, facing the werewolf without fear at all, and slashed at the werewolf's neck with his sword. If it is an ordinary creature or human being, it will definitely avoid Lin's long sword, but the werewolf has long been stimulated by the full moon and went crazy. A man and a wolf passed by each other, and Lin cut a foot-long gap in the werewolf's neck with his sword, almost beheading the werewolf, and the werewolf's claws also slashed across Lin's chest. Lin was taken aback, and thought it was over. Nima, you werewolf, you don't play cards according to the rules, how can you die together if you meet? The werewolf's neck was sprayed with blood, and he fell to the ground. Lin quickly looked down at himself, only to see a few claw marks on the cotton shirt on his chest, and it was slightly damaged, but luckily the skin was not injured, otherwise Lin might face change. Risk of becoming a werewolf. Lin couldn't laugh or cry when he saw it. It turned out that on the system interface, the thick illustrated book was leaning on his chest, which provided Lin with some defense power, and he was not disemboweled by the werewolf. He imposed all protection by himself. Then he was afraid that he would throw a ball. Lin directly sealed the werewolf who was dying on the ground. At this time, the werewolf who had just been knocked unconscious still remembered that Lin did not hesitate to give him a mark of all petrification and then a seal. Flowing clouds and flowing water are generally smooth. 2 more werewolves rushed out, like 2 little calves. Lin avoided while looking for an opportunity to cast the petrification spell on the werewolves. I have to say that the petrification spell and the seal are really the best partners, and the 2 werewolves who are not very strong can't. He was KO'd by Lin in 5 minutes. One of 4 werewolves, the werewolf illustrated book is directly lit, the magic power bonus is +2, and the summoned beast is obtained. White werewolf, level 3, CD, 1 hour 59 minutes and 59 seconds, it seems that it cannot be summoned immediately. Lin's magic power has been raised to 15, +4, young wizard with limited potential. I hope you can successfully advance to the 4th grade. Seeing the magic power that is rising steadily, Lin is still a little happy. The corners of his mouth twitched. I thought it was going to be until dawn, but I didn't expect the battle to be resolved in half an hour. The other werewolves hid in the woods and didn't dare to come out. Lin didn't bother to provoke them. He took a breath and went deeper into the Forbidden Forest. He is going to challenge the overlord of the Forbidden Forest. Acromantula, level 4-8. The Acromantula in the Forbidden Forest was reared by Hagrid privately. This thing reproduces quickly and has a long lifespan. Hogwarts teachers and janitors go to the Forbidden Forest several times a year to remove the little spiders, so as to avoid the entire Forbidden Forest has become a nest of 8-eyed spiders. The real adult Acromantulas are like elephants in size, covered with hard carapace and black hair, extremely terrifying, and what's even more weird is that they also possess wisdom and can speak human language. To put it simply, he is already the spider spirit in westward journey. After a few casual steps, he found a small spider the size of a palm. Bylin inspected the environment and then dashed in one direction. He crossed the mountains and walked into a somewhat dilapidated forest. Many trees were withered, and there were white spider webs everywhere. Needless to say, this was the old nest of the Acromantula. Chapter 5. Challenge the Overlord of the Forbidden Forest. Bylin didn't like this place very much, and was even a little disgusted. On the ground, between the roots of the trees, and between the big trees above his head, there were soft spider webs everywhere, and there were white insect eggs in the bushes, and there were yellow-green spots on them. Unidentified, Bylin walked through the pile of fallen leaves in the forest, and many small spiders ran out of it, and fled in groups. Bylin tried to seal the little spider, but found no eggs, and the illustrated book didn't respond to the little spider. Passing through the woods, there is a large open space in front of you, but there are deep holes everywhere on the ground and on the hillside. The small ones are only as big as a fist, and the big ones are big enough to drive a beetle car. Anyone who has seen Harry Potter knows that these are descendants of Aragog, the Acromantula raised by Hagrid. At this time, Aragog was very old, and his control over his offspring was no longer as good as before. When Aragog died, the 8-eyed spiders in the entire Forbidden Forest lost their restraint and began to attack humans. Later, they were driven by Voldemort to attack Hogwarts. Looking at the caves all over the mountains and plains, he was as bold as Bylin, and felt a little intrusive. If a swarm of bees ran out, no matter how fast he chanted the spell, he would not be able to deal with it. But it's all here, so he can't return empty-handed. He continued to go north, thinking that he could escape at any time, and then pointed to the nearest big hole in the ground. The flames are blazing. A ball of flame ignited in the cave, but the fire was not as powerful as a torch, and it went out automatically after a while, which made Bylin feel a little embarrassed. Although the flame was small, it was enough to startle the creatures inside. Bylin only heard a rustling sound, and after a while, a big black spider as big as a round table came out of the hole, followed by the second and third. Bylin gritted his teeth, and pointed with his magic wand, all petrified. The big spider rushing to the front stopped immediately, and its dark body turned grey-white. Bylin felt proud. Hee, this trick really works. But when he was about to use this trick on the second big spider, he suddenly felt dizzy and felt a bit overdrawn by magic power, but the spell still worked, petrifying a leg of the second spider. The spiders didn't delay, they rushed forward, opened their disgusting mouth parts one by one, and rushed towards Bylin to bite. It is true that the 8-eyed spiders in the Forbidden Forest will not actively attack humans during this period of time, but they are not used to intruders who break into their lair. After all, who would refuse a snack delivered to their door? Bylin swallowed his saliva and quickly pulled out his long sword. He stuck the sword into the spider's mouth and pierced the head of a spider that rushed over. A stream of green body fluids gushed out of the spider's mouth. Withdrawing the long sword, he was still splashed all over by disgusting bodily fluids. Bylin dodged and counterattacked, but more and more spiders came out of the hole. Although Bylin's swordsmanship was good, he was a bit powerless to deal with so many spiders. But Bylin only remembered a few of the Harry Potter world. Simple spell names. I secretly regret not making a cheat sheet or something. I don't know how many spiders I killed, and finally retreated to the dry forest over there, but my body was covered with spider fluids, and I looked very embarrassed, and the illustrated book didn't respond to these round table-sized, 1-meter-tall spiders. Judging that they were baby spiders, he couldn't complete the seal. Bylin immediately felt WTF. No wonder the Acromantula in the illustrated book was a level 6-8 creature. Until a behemoth crawled out of one of the largest holes in the ground. As soon as the huge monster came out, the surrounding giant spiders gave way to a passage, surrounding Bylin from all sides, like forming an ancient Roman arena. Bylin saw it, and I'll fuck it up. This 8-eyed spider is the size of a delivery truck, the spider's legs are as thick as a bag, and the 8 white eyeballs are the size of a plate. Could it be that Hagrid put it in the Forbidden Forest? What about Aragog in the movie? At this time, Aragog was over 50 years old. He was already in the old age of Acromantus, and he suffered from severe cataracts. Although his eyes were big and numerous, he couldn't see clearly. Balin saw that Aragog's level 8 creature was definitely the king in the Forbidden Forest. Balin beheaded so many spiders, which made Aragog very angry. Even if Balin had a magic creature affinity +2, it would be useless at this time. Harry Potter also talked with Aragog, and helped Harry Potter clear Hagrid's charges, but at this time Aragog didn't want to chat with Balin, and Balin was also bound to win, not retreating but advancing. Meet Aragog. Aragog has a pair of huge chelicerae, like two huge sickles. Although the 8 milky white eyes can no longer see the figure of Balan, Aragog can roughly know the location of Balan through the smell and sound. Clawed towards Balin with his chelicerae. Balin sideways avoided Aragog's claws, bravely rushed to the side of Aragog's head, and slashed fiercely on Aragog's 2 huge fangs with his sword. Aragog was too big, and there was really no point of attack on the front of the spider. The 2 huge fangs blocked most of Aragog's face, and the fangs were extremely strong. Balin's attack, only some of the grey-white worm hairs on the fangs were scraped off, but it did not cause any harm. Aragog opened his gag, and stabbed Balin head-on with 2 fangs. Balin's heart tightened. After taking this bite, he estimated that he didn't need Aragog to inject the venom on the spot. He would lose his head, and Balin immediately regretted that he had taken too long. I should have known that I would wait for my magic power to improve before taking risks. Regrets and regrets, Balin quickly fell on the ground, regardless of whether his posture was elegant, and dodged Aragog's fangs. Balin raised his head, and stabbed Aragog's jaw with a sword without saying a word. Hagrid's long sword was very sharp, and it pierced half a foot deep at once. Balin knew that such a small injury was useless to such a big spider, so he grabbed the hilt with both hands, and punched Aragog's jaw hard. Breaking off, a big hole more than a foot long was stabbed. A stream of blue-green body fluids gushed out immediately and drenched Balin's head again. So far, Balin's whole body could no longer see the original color. Fortunately, the venom of the giant spider was hidden in the fangs, and there was nothing wrong with the blood. It is highly poisonous or corrosive, otherwise Balin would be cool just now. Aragog felt the severe pain, raised his head like crazy, and poked at Balin with his 2 claws like pounding garlic. Balin was full of potential, roaring and dodging the attacks again and again, and finally looked at him. Aragog tried his best to get through the gap between his side limbs, and went around to Aragog's side. Balin suddenly realized that it was inconvenient for such a big spider to turn its body, mainly because the 8 legs had to be coordinated. Balin felt that his magic power had recovered a bit, so he quickly slapped Aragog's 1 leg, petrify everything. Even though the magic power was not high, and only part of the foot was petrified, Aragog still felt as if his foot had been stepped on the ground, and his body was tilted to one side. He was really old and not as flexible as he was in his prime. Balin quickly walked around to Aragog's back, facing its abdomen with 2 swords. Aragog's belly carapace was relatively soft, and Balin's long sword cut several deep wounds. Chapter 6. The First Ally. Pain in the abdomen. Aragog wanted to turn around, but Balin simply ran around Aragog, looking for an opportunity. Balin gritted his teeth, flew up, and jumped onto Aragog's back. Balin once heard the old man say that if a person is blind, his hearing will be extra sensitive. He wondered if the same is true for spiders. While trying to stabilize his figure on Aragog's back, he gave himself a "shut your ears and listen." Spiders listen to sounds through the gaps in their 8 legs, and they don't have long ears, so Balin rode directly on Aragog's back, pointed at its 4 legs, and shouted, "Summon the spikes. Call Mandela." This is the first time Balin has used his summoning skills. In a flash of brilliance, more than a dozen grotesque, ugly, and black mandrake roots were thrown at the base of Aragog's feet, followed by terrifying screams. A feature forest. As a low-level creature of level 1, the mandrake is almost defenseless when planted in the ground, just like an ordinary carrot, but if it is pulled out alive, it will emit a blast that can shock people. There are even life-threatening screams in the eardrums. The scream lasted for about 3 seconds. Not to mention Aragog, who was in the center of the scream. Even the other spiders around were scared and fled. If it weren't for the ear-closing spell cast in advance, Balin probably it was the tragic end of the bleeding from the 7 holes, but even though the ear-closing spell was cast, Balin still felt shocked by the screams. Aragog swayed, was stunned by the screams, and fell to the ground. Balin undid the ear-closing spell for himself, and the mandrakes disappeared automatically after screaming. It was a short-term skill call. Seal. Bylin aimed at Aragog's big head and activated the seal function of the illustrated book. A burst of brilliance flowed, like a hut-sized Aragog was taken into the summoning book, and at this end, the picture book of the Acromantula was lit up. Bylin looked at the back of the thick book, and it had changed into Illustrated Book Completion Total Score, 368, Illustrated Book Magic Power Bonus, 7, Magic Creature Affinity, +3, Summoned Beast, Screaming Mandrake, Level 1, CD 9:45, White Werewolf, Level 3, Magic Power added 3 points, reached 15, +7, and did not get the skill to summon the 8-eyed spider. It was a pity, but a clay pot exploded, a full 3 pints of the venom of the 8-eyed spider. Bylin felt sore all over his body, so he quickly gave himself a quick recovery. This was a spell he learned from Old George, and sure enough, a cool energy spread all over his body, and he felt much better. Just now he was feeling better, but Bylin saw another huge monster coming out of the hole. It should be Aragog's spouse Mosag. Although his body was not as big as Aragog's, Bylin's magical power had not yet fully recovered. Screaming Mandela still has a CD of nearly 10 minutes. The level 3 white werewolf is obviously not enough to watch. The sealing task has been completed. This is not the time to be brave. Before the surrounding spiders are scared away and they are not encircled, retreat quickly for the top. Mosag, who had lost his spouse, roared, and many smaller spiders chased after him, but Mosag did not leave the Acromantula's territory, perhaps because the nature of protecting spider eggs outweighed hatred and impulsiveness. Even without Mosag's pursuit, Bylin was still very embarrassed by the flood of other spiders. He really couldn't tell whether it was the rat swarm he saw in the woods when he was a child, or the spider swarm he encountered today. Anyway, from the bottom of my heart, I never want to come back to the spider nest. Just when the spiders were about to catch up with Bylin, dozens of sharp arrows were shot from the woods in front of him. Bylin quickly fell on the ground and dodged the arrows. The arrows knocked over a dozen spiders to the ground. Although they didn't die, the spiders stopped their pursuit and retreated slowly. Bylin looked up and saw that he was facing the morning sun. Dozens of tall figures came out from behind the woods. They had fur and hair of various colors from brown red to grayish-white. The body is exactly the horseman in the Forbidden Forest. The leading centaur, with black hair and a beard, looked wild and proud. Bylin recognized at a glance that this was Bane, the leader of the centaur, and beside him, the man with platinum hair, blue eyes and the body of a silver-maned horse, even considered handsome by human eyes, should be Feyreronzie. In the 5th part of Harry Potter, he also served as a teacher of divination at Hogwarts at the invitation of Dumbledore. Bane was condescending and looked at Bylin coldly. Seeing that they didn't seem to shoot him directly, Bylin quickly got up, and wiped dry the long sword stained with Aragog's body fluids on the side tree trunk. Scabbard. Seeing that Bylin retracted his sword, the horsemen also loosened their bowstrings. The horsemen were quite proud and disdained to sneak attack by taking advantage of others. Bylin wiped the stains on his face with the corner of his clothes, and said, "Thanks to the distinguished horseman for his kind help." The so-called flattery is not flattery, but Bylin really likes the horse people in the novel. Although they are a bit rough and sensitive, they are always kind. Although with Bylin's magical creature affinity +3, the centaur has no hostility towards Bylin, but Bane still snorted coldly, "Weak human wizard, you broke into the territory of the centaur. You should be punished." In fact, the centaurs regard the entire Forbidden Forest as their territory. Of course, humans, giants, werewolves, and even acromanders do not recognize it. Bylin bowed his head and apologized, "I am deeply sorry for this. I am a new teacher at Hogwarts. I came here to study the magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest. I met a pack of wolves in the forest yesterday. I lost my way and strayed into the territory of the noble centaur." Firenze saw that Bylin's sword and body were covered with blue-green spider body fluids, and he couldn't help asking, "You met Aragog?" "Oh, it's an Acromantula the size of a hill." Bylin sighed and said, "Unfortunately, I killed some spiders during the siege of the Acromantula, and that huge Acromantula seemed very angry and wanted to swallow me up, but I had no choice but to stun it with mandrake screams, then killed it." The centaurs couldn't help but be moved. Aragog was the centaur's confidant, and the ever-expanding spider nest directly threatened the security of the centaur's territory. Although there was some doubt as to how Bylin alone could go deep into the spider's lair and kill the giant Aragog, the blue-green spider body fluids on their bodies fully explained the problem. The horsemen couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and there was some joy in the eyes. They looked at each other. Bane froze for a moment. Firenze nodded to him. Bane took the initiative to put the bow and arrow behind his back, and said, "Human wizard, you have won the respect of the Centaur. My name is Bane, and I belong to the Centaur. Leader." Bylin bowed slightly and said, "My name is Kylan White, but I prefer the name you call my hometown in the east." Bilinear. Firenze's eyes lit up and he said, "Ah, the magical east. Hello, Bylin, my name is Firenze." Several other Centaur leaders also introduced themselves. Firenze has a good impression of Bylin. He is one of the horse people who is very friendly to humans, and he will be rejected by the same race because of helping humans. At this time, Firenze really wants to invite Bylin to the horse people. In the village, Bylin looked at the sky and said that he would go back to Hogwarts as soon as possible. His good friend Hagrid might be very worried about him. After learning that Bylin was Hagrid's friend, Bane's attitude became better, and he took the initiative to send Bylin for more than 10 miles to the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Bylin took out some trinkets, mostly carvings such as animal teeth and horns, that Kylan White had collected in the suitcase, and gave them to Bane, saying, "Apologize again to the distinguished Centaur, I really appreciate it. Those who trespassed on your territory unintentionally, take these collections and express my apologies." Bane took an animal tooth pendant curiously, looked at it in the sunlight. It was very delicate, and suddenly smiled, accepting Bylin's apology. Firenze said, "You helped us get rid of the king of the giant Acromantula. The Centaur should also express his gratitude to you. I don't know what Bylin you want." Bylin showed a bright smile and said, "The friendship between the horse people is very precious." He reached out and shook hands with Bane and Firenze in turn. He knew that he had gained his first ally at Hogwarts. Chapter 7. The story begins. With the Centaur tribe as an ally in the Forbidden Forest, Bylin's collection of illustrations in the Forbidden Forest went much smoother. He deliberately went back to Hogwarts Castle to find all the simple and easy-to-use books in the library. Remember the spell. Bylin spent a whole day sorting out a long list of spells, all of which were practical spells suitable for combat. The stern Mrs. Pants was very magnanimous to the new young professor. 3 weeks passed in a blink of an eye, and Bylin would take the mead that Torhaig bought from Hogsmeade to visit the Centaur every now and then, insinuating about the creatures that the Centaur hated in the Forbidden Forest, and then abducting Bane and Phalenzer went hunting these nasty creatures. After sealing giant monsters, goblins, leopard cats, and even met a seriously injured unicorn, he still didn't forget to go to the Black Lake to seal a few mermaids secretly. Finally, Bylin completed the pleasant scoring mode. It's already August. Bylin glanced at the attributes behind the illustrated book. Illustrated book completion total score, 858, illustrated book magic bonus, 16, magic creature affinity, +4, summoned beasts, white werewolf, level 3, screaming mandrake, level 1, blessing of mermaid, level 3, magic power increased by 16 points, reaching 15, +16, surpassing ordinary adult wizards. The newly acquired Mermaid's Blessing is an underwater breathing skill. When used, an illusory mermaid possesses Bylin's body, allowing him to grow temporary gills. The effect is exactly the same as that of the gills. It can only be said that it is better than nothing. The white werewolf summoning, as the name suggests, summons a fierce and loyal white werewolf that can assist in the battle. Each time it lasts for 10 minutes, the CD is 2 hours. Early this morning, Miss Catherine, whom Bylin met in Hogsmeade's tailor shop, rode a broom to find Hagrid's hut. Speaking of the tailor shop, there is another episode. Bylin went to Hogsmeade's tailor shop, which also makes custom-made clothing, and wanted to get a handsome outfit to take office. He happened to meet Old George's daughter Catherine. Old George didn't brag well. Catherine was young and beautiful, and she was a bit playful. When she measured Bylin, her face was blushing, and she looked at Bylin with a different emotion. The two chatted happily, and Bylin asked her to pay attention to the news, because the Hogwarts newspapers were always late for a day or two. No, Catherine brought the latest issue of the Daily Prophet and handed it to Bylin. Bylin took a look, and there was a family photo on it. The Ron family was happily taking a group photo in front of the Pyramid of Khufu in Egypt. It is the beginning of the plot of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. It is precisely because Sirius Black, who is serving his sentence in Azkaban, got this day's newspaper from Fudge, the Minister of Magic, so he saw that the rat-scabbers that Ron had raised for many years was the same parents who betrayed Harry and blamed him. The culprit for Black. Peter Pettigrew, nicknamed Wormtail, so Black was worried that Peter would be bad for Harry, so he turned into a big dog and escaped from Azkaban. At the same time, the illustrated book even sent a mission reminder. Discovery Mission, Prisoner of Azkaban Phase, Trial of Courage, Start. Trial of Courage. Dementors are one of the most terrifying and evil creatures in the world. Help Harry gain the courage and strength to fight against Dementors, and defeat a Dementor. P.S. The Wizarding world has not found a way to kill the Dementors completely, and the Patron Saint spell can disperse the Dementors. Killing a Dementor or a Death Eater with the mark of the Dark Lord will get Hogwarts contribution. Activate Hogwarts Quartermaster Hardison. With Bylin's current level of magic power, going to Azkaban and fighting the Dementors must be a free gift. Looking at the mission introduction, Bylin couldn't help but wonder, there is a problem. The method of Dementors, and the following said that killing Dementors will get contribution points, isn't this a contradiction? But then, Bylin thought to himself, there must be a way to kill them completely, but they haven't been discovered yet. There are a few blank pages at the back of my summoning guidebook. It may not be possible to seal the Dementors. I remember a Dementor that Harry Potter encountered on the way from King's Cross Station to Hogsmeade, when Professor Lupin used the Patronus charm to save him. But it also left him with a psychological shadow. Bylin thought, there are still more than 3 weeks, maybe I can find Harry Potter and train him on courage. Although a little reluctant, Catherine still bid farewell to Bylin, and told him to go to Hogsmeade to see her Union. Bylin scratched his head. He was an emotional idiot in the real world. He didn't expect to come to this world, and he still didn't know how to deal with emotional problems. The summer vacation in England in the 90s was extremely long, lasting 3 full months. Throughout June and July, Harry Potter had to go back to the Dursleys' house and endure 360-degree humiliation from his aunt, uncle, and cousin. The already bad relationship got even worse after Ron Weasley made a rash phone call. In a simple sentence, Harry was wrong to breathe at home. In fact, Bylin is very curious, since the Dursleys hate Harry Potter so much, why every time the staff of the Ministry of Magic or Hogwarts ask them if they are willing to continue to be Harry's guardians, and when they are on vacation when taking care of him, his aunt and his wife still agreed with one voice. Relying on his superhuman memory, Bylin rushed to Little Whinging, Surrey. However, number 4 Virgin Drive was not easy to find. When Bylin rode an old broom borrowed from Hayner, he found Dursley's place. It's already night at the door of the house. From far away, there was a faint light from a small window. It should be that Harry Potter was catching up with his summer homework. The paper on burning witches was completely nonsense, but just as Bylin approached, a little boy walked to the window, wearing old-fashioned round glasses, with a cute and fleshy face. Isn't he the famous Harry Potter? Bylin hurriedly flew to the other side of the house to avoid being seen by him. After thinking about it, Bylin suddenly realized that today is Harry's birthday, and when he is mourning himself against the starry sky, 3 owls will be given to him. Come for a birthday present. Suddenly, Bylin heard the voices of 2 adults, and when he looked up, he seemed to be right under the window of Harry's aunt's bedroom. Petunia, that brat during the day has pissed me off again, I want to beat him up when I see him. Be patient, think about the £300 a month, and when he grows up, we can get Lily's inheritance. I don't want to see him again for Halloween and Christmas. Don't worry my dear, I'll tell the guy at that fucking school to spend the holidays at school, and we can just go on a trip and take Dudley. Bylin suddenly realized that Harry's mother must have left some kind of entrustment and a large sum of money. They also left a lot of galleons for Harry in Gringotts. As long as they raise Harry, they will have money take. At this time, 3 black shadows flew from a distance, flapping their wings, and the sound became louder and louder. What's that sound? Harry's uncle asked, and then, the window above Bylin's head opened, and a man and a woman stuck their heads out from the window. Dizzy. Bylin rolled his eyes, pointed his wand at the couple, and whispered 2 stun spells, and they fell down on the windowsill and passed out. Chapter 8. Aunt Marge visits. At this time, Harry was happily letting 3 owls into his room, and received several packages and letters. First was the Daily Prophet from Ron, showing off a little about the 700 galleon grand prize and the happy trip to Egypt, and then his birthday present. A pocket-looking glass. Hermione's gift was brought back by the Snow White Hedwig, and it was Harry's favorite, the broomstick care kit. Harry was quite satisfied with this gift. However, what followed was Hagrid's next semester's textbook on the protection of fantastic beasts, the Monster Book of Monsters. As Hagrid's assistant, Bylin also worked a little harder and suggested that Hagrid change to a quieter one. Textbooks, however, Hagrid was pretty stubborn about it. Watching Harry fight hand-to-hand with the monster book and finally subdue it, Bylin couldn't help but smile. He envied Harry for having such a wonderful and magical childhood, but Bylin loved his parents who were still in his hometown very much. If he was asked to exchange the lives of his parents for Harry's life, he would definitely refuse. Thinking of this, Bylin sympathized with Harry again. Harry was worried about waking up his aunt's family, but his cousin's snoring was still loud and could be faintly heard throughout the house, and his aunt and his wife were still lying on the balcony, and they wouldn't wake up until dawn. Harry's last letter was the notice of the new semester, which should have been written by Professor McGonagall, but obviously the vice principal could not be free to write letters to all the students in the school, so Mrs. Pants, the librarian, acted as a temporary assistant. Undertook the writing of the school opening notices for Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. Dear Mr. Porter, please note that the new term starts on September 9 st, and the Hogwarts Express will depart from Platform 3/4 of King's Cross Station at 11 o'clock. Third years are allowed to go to Hogsmeade on certain weekends. Please give the enclosed permission form to your parent or guardian to sign. Enclosed is the book list for the first and second semesters. In addition, there will be a number of new professors and assistant professors teaching in the next semester. Professor Hagrid, who will be in charge of the protection of magical beasts class, recommended his assistant professor, Mr. Kellen White, who will visit your residence in the near future. Please don't be rude. Your faithful Vice-Chancellor Professor McGonagall. Obviously, Mrs. Pinksy helped Bylin and added some private goods in it, which saved some trouble for Bylin's visit. But Harry was horrified, because the aunt's family hated anything wizard-related, including wizards themselves, and the last time Hagrid came over, he almost messed up his enrollment. He wondered what kind of communication the new teacher, Kellen White, sounded quite a serious name, would have with Uncle Vernon, and whether it would keep him from going to Hogwarts next term. The young heart was frightened all night, and even forgot to ask Uncle Vernon or Aunt Petunia to sign the Hogsmeade permission form. The next morning, Harry went downstairs to have breakfast with dark circles rubbing his eyes. He saw the Dursleys sitting around the new TV in the kitchen watching the news about the escaped criminal Blake. The news anchor on the internet burst into curses, with a look of hatred. Uncle Vernon is the director of Grunning Company. Harry and Bylin both thought how he was such an annoying person to sit in the director's position, and he claimed to be a successful person. Full of hatred and disdain, including Harry's family, how stupid, eccentric, and despicable people are not willing to learn a little about excavators. Groaning is a company that produces drills and excavators, and other practical things. To be a wizard without skills sounds like a street clown in the 18th century. To some extent, Uncle Vernon is the same kind of person as Voldemort and Grindelwald, but the Dark Lords discriminate against Muggle blood, wishing that Muggles would all die. Vernon discriminates against wizard blood, wishing that wizards all death light. After scolding Blake, who had never met him before, Uncle Vernon announced that Aunt Marge was coming to visit. This news shocked Harry again, even more than he should have, because if the visiting teacher happened to meet Aunt Marge, Harry couldn't imagine it, it was hell. Aunt Maggie is Uncle Vernon's older sister, and every time she visits, Harry brings a terrible memory. She is more vicious than Uncle Vernon, she can find the most vicious words in the world, and she always uses them to curse Harry. This actually has no boy with her half a dime. Uncle Vernon gave Harry some long-winded instructions, the main point of which was to remind him that he was studying at the St. Bruce Safety Center School for Juvenile Offenders. Bylin is also very puzzled about this point. Could it be that a child in his family is a juvenile delinquent, which can make Vernon more face in front of Aunt Maggie in all walks of life? Harry looked listless, and agreed dejectedly. Seeing Harry's listless look, Uncle Vernon kicked Harry's calf mercilessly, causing him to almost fall to the ground. Aunt Petunia hurriedly held Uncle Vernon back to prevent him from beating Harry further. Although she had done a lot since she was a child, but now Harry is different. If he really got angry, Harry would be so weird, a trick that threatens to tear down their houses. But no one knows that in the shadows outside the window, Bylin is using the most advanced camera in the 90s to record Uncle Vernon's every move. After repeating the name of the juvenile delinquent school 3 times, Uncle Vernon was finally satisfied, and pushed Harry staggeringly with one hand, and walked out of the gate. Harry returned to the room like a walking corpse, threw himself on the bed, and couldn't stop crying for a long time, but in the end, he still cheered up, wrote a text message to Ron, and paid Hedwig away. It wasn't long before there was the crunch of gravel on wheels outside, and Aunt Petunia screamed into Harry's room, angrily chasing him out to meet their guests. Aunt Marge looked exactly like Uncle Vernon, tall and strong, with a purple face and even a small beard. She took a huge box from Vernon's car, and a grumpy old bulldog jumped out of the back of the car, and she leaned over and hugged her. Aunt Maggie threw the box on Harry's stomach, then hugged Harry's cousin, Fat Dudley, and kissed them hard. "I have to go to my mouth." And Dudley proudly raised Harry the brand new 20 pounds that Maggie had stuffed into his hand. Chapter 9. Liberating Harry Potter. Aunt Maggie was also very rude to Aunt Petunia. Lynn wondered how Aunt Petunia could tolerate her elder sister-in-law for so many years and treat her as a guest of honor every time. Seeing her dog on the table to eat together, Lynn would have suspected that Petunia had been enchanted by Maggie if he hadn't seen Uncle Vernon waving a check in his hand to Petunia with a smile on his face. It is conceivable that Vernon has been complaining to his very wealthy sister who lives in the country all the way, why he works hard outside alone, not only to raise his son, but also to take care of the orphan for Petunia's dead sister. He lost a lot of strength and so on, and then successfully got a rich check from the childless Maggie, and Harry once again gained the hatred of Aunt Maggie. Soon it was time for lunch, and Aunt Petunia brought out all the delicacies she could prepare, and Vernon opened a bottle of good wine, but Maggie brought the conversation back to Harry. "Does St. Bruce use a whip, boy? Some people just deserve to. Petunia, if I were you, I'd write them a letter and say that you approve of absolute violence against this brat." Harry lowered his head, gritted his teeth, and endured it. "Vernon, don't blame yourself for this child becoming like this. If something in the bones is broken, no one can do anything about it. If there is something wrong with the bitch, the pup will definitely not be much better." Although Harry gritted his teeth with all his strength, his anger still released a magic power, and Lynn, who was shooting outside the window, couldn't let Maggie's wine glass explode, so he quickly cast a curse, and Maggie's wine glass shook shake, steady. After drinking for 3 rounds, Aunt Maggie asked loudly, "What does that guy named Potter do?" Vernon said, "He doesn't have a job, unemployed." Aunt Maggie suddenly laughed triumphantly and said, "I've expected it a long time ago, that's a trash, a slob, and a liar. I guess he must have been drunk and hit him with a car." "He wasn't." Harry trembled with anger, he had never been so angry before. "They didn't die in a car accident." Aunt Marge screamed, pointing at Harry, "They must have had their heads shattered when they hit you, you liar, little bastard. They've left you behind for these respectable, hard-working relatives. Liability, you rude, ungrateful boy." Harry's anger rushed to his head, but at this moment, there was a knock on the door outside, and a young male voice said, "Take the liberty to visit. I'm a teacher at Mr. Potter's school. I'm here to visit." The sound made Harry wake up instantly, but it was followed by deep fear. Vernon was also terrified, and hurriedly asked Petunia to take Maggie back to her room to rest, but the thin Petunia could not carry Aunt Maggie, who was a whole head taller than her, and Aunt Maggie didn't intend to avoid it, and even threatened her aggressively. He stood up, strode to the door, and opened it. Lynn was wearing an elegant summer formal suit, with a gold pocket watch pinned to his chest, and a pair of shiny new leather shoes. He looked like an upper class, and was standing in front of the door. Aunt Maggie has a good eye. Just the clothes of this man of Oriental descent in front of her cost hundreds of pounds. She is not someone she can bully casually. Lynn glanced at the people in the room, took out a camera behind his back, and said with a smile, "Actually, I have been here for a while, and I seem to have captured my student being violently abused by his guardian at home. If you don't want to, I'm taking it to a federal judge, and you better invite me in to sit down and have a longo, English coffee, and talk." Vernon and Petunia were stunned. Aunt Maggie was the first to react. She screamed and reached out to grab the camera in Lynn's hand, trying to snatch it and drop it. "Fuchsia! Silently!" Lynn didn't get used to this ugly woman. He directly sealed her mouth, hung her upside down from the ceiling, walked in coolly, and closed the door by the way. Dudley was terrified. With a loud cry, he fell off the chair and rolled towards Lynn like a meatball. Lynn rolled his eyes and said, "Muggle shield." Immediately, Dudley was pushed aside, stuck in the gap under the coffee table, only his head was exposed, and was about to yell, when Lynn cast another silent spell. "Very good, it's quiet now." Lynn walked to their dining table. Harry was staring at him with wide eyes. He didn't expect this young wizard to use magic in the Muggle house at will, and what was even more shocking was, he actually cast a spell in a language he had never heard before. The spell was shorter, and the casting speed was not twice as fast. Bylin winked at Harry and said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Kylan White. I am a new teacher at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and an employee of the Ministry of Magic. This is my ID." Bylin gracefully took out 2 documents. One was the assistant professor's work card signed by Dumbledore, and the other was the work card of the Ministry of Magic. "Since my students are being treated violently by muggles, accompanied by insults and curses, I believe my uncle, Director Fudge, will not blame me for a small punishment for a few insignificant muggles. You two better not move. If you move more, I will turn your family into toads and send them to the zoo's reptile hall." Vernon and Petunia were so frightened that their faces turned pale, and they sat obediently without daring to move. On the one hand, they were threatened by the federal court, and on the other hand, they were turned into toads and thrown into the reptile house. Vernon shut his mouth tightly, not daring to provoke the young man in front of him. Harry stood up happily and said, "You are Professor Kellen, you are welcome to visit my home." Bylin nodded to Harry, and glanced at the wine on the table. It turned out to be a bottle of Martel imported from France. All the dishes and sundries disappeared, and then the sound of a pile of plates falling to the ground and smashing came from the kitchen. Looking at the clean table, Bylin took out a piece of paper and placed it in front of Uncle Vernon. Vernon saw that it was a statement, agreeing that from now on during holidays, Harry Potter could choose to go anywhere. Harry's eyes were full of gold. He wanted so badly to spend the summer at Ron's house. They were full of good hearts and lots of fun and brother and sister. Vernon spit out a voice from the corner of his mouth, "I won't sign, I will never let you succeed." Bylin smiled and said, "Ha, I know, Harry's mother once left a large sum of money. As long as you raise and take care of Harry, you will receive £300 a month, and when Harry becomes an adult, there will be a handsome payment, but do you think you can still be Harry's guardian if I hand this tape over to a federal judge?" As he spoke, Bylin pulled out the videotape from the camera and stuffed it into the projector next to the TV. Every household in Britain had it in the 90s. Then there was Vernon kicking Harry hard, forcing him to say he was in a delinquent school, and pushing him staggeringly, followed by Aunt Marge and Vernon talking to Harry's parents for a long time. Half an hour of slander. Watching the video, Vernon and Petunia turned pale and then green. Bylin said, "If I want to prosecute, the county prosecutor may impose a fine of more than £1 on you, or 3 years in prison. And there should be many kind-hearted people in London who are willing to adopt Harry. After all, he only came of age in 5 years and spent most of his time at Hogwarts. You choose yourself." Vernon is also a bachelor, so he signed his name very neatly. He felt that he was not sincere enough, so he asked Petunia to sign it, and then stamped his handprint. "And Hogsmeade's permission letter?" Harry exclaimed in surprise. Bylin put away the statement and said, "No need, someone will sign it for you. Hurry up and pack your bags, kid." Chapter 10. Both of them have scars. Harry quickly left the dining room and ran to the storage room under the stairs. It took almost 2 minutes to pack his suitcase, holding a pillowcase full of textbooks and birthday gifts in his arms, and carrying a handbag in his hand. Hedwig's empty cage. But this time, Uncle Vernon didn't chase after him, but sat at the dining table obediently like Aunt Petunia, looking at Bylin. Bylin took a sip of the brandy gracefully, then spit it out on the ground. "It's so awful." Seeing Harry walk around Aunt Maggie with the fuchsia hanging on it, open the door, and look back at him, Bylin smiled and threw the goblet into the kitchen. While walking outside, Dudley and Maggie's spells were lifted. Maggie screamed and wanted to fight Bylin desperately. Uncle Vernon stepped over, grabbed her tightly, and covered her mouth. He had never been so violent to his sister in his life, and smiled obsequiously at Bylin. Bylin turned his head and said, "I think when colleagues from the Ministry of Magic come to ask, you know how to answer, so goodbye." Bylin raised the videotape in his hand and bid farewell to this wonderful family. Breathing the free air, Harry dragged his suitcase, followed behind Bylin, and said, Professor Kylan, I haven't officially introduced myself yet." Bylin waved his hand and said, "No, actually I know you very well, and we have many similarities." He raised his bangs on his forehead, revealing a cat's claw-shaped scar. Harry looked at Bylin's scar in amazement. Although the shape was a bit sloppy, it was the first time he had seen other people with marks similar to his own, because the mark on his forehead had been regarded as a different kind by others since he was a child. Was mocked at least 1,000 times by Cousin Dudley. Is your scar also caused by the Hawata Kedavra? Harry asked cautiously. How should I put it, do you think I'm a powerful wizard? Bylin asked back. Of course, sir, I've never seen anyone cast a spell as fast as you. Harry said excitedly. Actually, I was much stronger than I am now, but the person who gave me the mark deprived me of my ability, making me almost a muggle. It took me a lot of effort to return to my current level. Bylinks and mouth nonsense. Is it Voldemort? I mean you know who. Harry blurted out. Every wizard he'd ever met except Dumbledore was so terrified of Voldemort that he couldn't even mention his name. Actually, there are many dangerous and evil forces in this world. You are destined to fight against Voldemort, and I don't like him very much. Well, the car should be coming soon. Bylin stood by the roadside, shaking his hand wand. At this time, a big black dog emerged from the shadow of the street corner, almost as tall as Harry, and roared at Bylin twice. Harry was taken aback. He had never seen such a fierce dog. Aunt Marge's bulldog was Snoopy by comparison. Oh! I forgot about you. Bylin took out a ham wrapped in a sticky note from his pocket, tore off the wrapping paper, and threw it to the big black dog. The big dog looked at the words on the sticky note, and seemed a little shocked, but quickly bit the sticky note and the ham, retreated into the shadows, and disappeared. Harry looked at the young professor who seemed to be omnipotent in front of him, a little envious of his free and easy behavior. Although they had known each other for less than 2 hours, Harry felt that he was as trustworthy as Dumbledore. Before they could continue the chat, they suddenly heard a deafening bang. A car headlight suddenly shot over in broad daylight. Harry quickly blocked his eyes with his hand, feeling a huge vehicle rushing straight towards them. Harry screamed and nearly rolled onto the pavement. But Bylin caught him in time. Harry just came back to his senses. A pair of huge wheels and headlights stopped beside the two of them. Harry took a closer look. The wheels and headlights belonged to a bright purple car, the 3-story bus, which appears to have appeared out of nowhere, reads Night Bus in gold letters on the windshield. Then, a conductor in a purple uniform jumped out of the bus and said loudly to the two, "Welcome to the Night Bus, you just hold out your wand hand, get on the bus, and we will take you deliver it wherever you want. My name is Stan Thornpark, and I'm your conductor today. Are you Mr. Kelling from the Ministry of Magic?" Stan didn't notice what was on Harry's forehead, but he was well informed, but he had heard a lot about the nephew of the Minister of Magic. He heard that this young master was very famous in the East, with powerful magic power, especially his wonderful monster summoning. Surgery. Bylin waved his hand and said, "Maybe I should communicate with my colleagues in the Department of Magical Transportation. The night bus often drives dangerously, which almost scares my students." Stan couldn't laugh anymore. He swallowed and said, "Please sir, Ern didn't do it on purpose, how about I give you a free ticket?" Bylin threw 2 galleons at him and said, "No more, give my student a cup of chocolate, and let's go to Diagon Alley." Stan took the gold coin, immediately beamed with joy, led the two into the car, offered to help Harry arrange the salute, and arranged 2 of the cleanest beds for the two. Then introduced them to the driver, the old wizard Ern. The night bus set off with a deafening bang, and the sudden acceleration nearly caused Harry to fall onto the bed, but Bylin stretched out his hand and gently supported him, not embarrassing him, and Harry realized that Bylin's strength is terrifying, and he is as light as a chicken in his hands. The speed of the car was extremely fast, and Harry watched in amazement that everything in front of the car, including street lights, mailboxes, trash cans, even houses and walls, automatically jumped to the side when the car passed by, and jumped again when the car passed by. Will be in its original position. Although it was the first time seeing Bylin, but now he is in the persona of an expert in the world, and he will not show a surprised expression. After seeing off a lady from Abergavenny, Stan leaned on the conductor's seat and unfolded a copy of the Daily Prophet. In the big photo, a man with a haggard face and long and messy hair is holding on to the iron fence of the prison with both hands, and roaring towards the outside, but from Harry's point of view, the man winked at him. Harry is a little strange, because he looked familiar. "That's the man," said Harry. "He's in the Muggle news, too." Stan smiled softly. "Sirius Black, of course he will be in the Muggle news." But he looked at Bylin, didn't dare to laugh at Harry, and handed him the newspaper. Harry opened the first page, and it read, "Black is still at large. Following Black's crimes and Minister for Magic Fudge's speech, Harry gasps that Black killed 13 people with a single spell 12 years ago." Looking at Sirius Black's gloomy eyes and white skin, Harry felt as terrifying as a vampire. Chapter 11, Two Choices, What do you choose? It looks scary, doesn't it? Stan asked, looking at Harry who was staring at the newspaper. He killed 13 people. Harry asked. Only one spell. That's right, Stan said, in broad daylight, under the eyes of everyone, he is a strong supporter of the mysterious man. What? Voldemort? Harry said without thinking. Stan's face paled with horror, Ern swerved sharply, and an entire factory jumped aside, dodging the bus. Your brain. Stan was about to scold, but Bylin waved his hand at him and said, the mysterious man is dead, this is a public place, you'd better not spread any rumors of a comeback, I will tell the Auror office. Stan swallowed, watched Bylin walk back to his bed, lay down comfortably, and even took out a pot of fragrant black tea from his small bag, and poured a cup on his own, without giving him any the meaning of sharing. Stan whispered to the curious Harry about Black's deeds, most of which were hearsay. Escaped from Azkaban, which is worse than hell. Azkaban is the scariest place on earth according to legend, even Harry's bravest friend Hagrid, was frightened and sweated coldly when he heard that he was going to be imprisoned in Azkaban. Harry's mind was in a mess. Stan handed him a cup of hot chocolate, and Harry drank it down, feeling better immediately. Stan sent off the passengers one by one, and finally Harry and Bylin were the only two passengers left on the bus. Ern drove the bus across Charing Cross Road like lightning. It was almost 10 o'clock in the evening, and Harry was so hungry that he went with his chest pressed against his back. He was so angry at noon that he didn't eat a few mouthfuls of pasta. Ern stepped on the brake a little lightly, and the night bus stopped in front of a dilapidated small bar, the Leaky Cauldron, behind which was the mysterious entrance leading to Diagon Alley. Thank you, Harry said heartily to Stan and Ern. Stan helped Harry unload the luggage, and said flatteringly to Bylin, I hope the journey will satisfy you, Mr. Kelly. Bylin threw him 2 silver sickles as a tip, waved his hands, and jumped down the steps with Harry. If the original plot remains the same, Stan will be controlled by the Imperious Curse and hunt down Harry, but most of the time he is just an ordinary person who likes to gossip. Harry waved goodbye to Stan, but they arrived a few hours early. Fudge did not come out of the Leaky Cauldron to reveal Harry's identity. Stan missed a bragging news tomorrow, but he immediately thought of a new topic. He uploaded the upstart of the British Wizarding World, Master Carlin, the most generous man in the world. Bylin led Harry into the bar, found a booth in the corner, ordered a sumptuous dinner from the boss Tom, and while eating the dinner, Harry asked, Sir, are we going directly back to Hogwarts? Bylin shook his head and said, You know, Hogwarts doesn't allow you to stay on campus during the summer vacation, and the student dormitory is now closed. Harry thought for a while and said, Maybe I can live in Hagrid's cabin. Bylin thought of the hut that smelled of bacon and strange fish, shook his head and said, This is not in line with school rules, boy, I have 2 suggestions. Harry took a bite of the hot dog, which tasted much better than Aunt Petunia's. Please tell me, sir. Bylin stretched out a finger and said, The first choice, you will meet the Minister of Magic here tomorrow morning, that is, my uncle Mr. Cornelius Fudge, and he will let you open a room in the Leaky Cauldron. Stay for more than 10 days, you can go to Florin Fusco's ice cream shop every day, eat delicious ice cream, and finish your thesis. In a few days, Hermione and Ron will come to Diagon Alley to reunite with you. I think you'll have a great time before school starts. When Harry heard Hermione and Ron, his eyes lit up immediately. Sounds very good, you seem to be able to predict the future, Mr. Carlin. But Harry keenly caught the traces of disappointment in Bylin's eyes, and those subtle emotions instantly aroused the courage and unyielding energy in his heart. Then what is the second choice? Sir. Bylin smiled and said, As I said, there are many terrifying and evil forces in this world. Under the protection of all friends and family members, spend a few years of happy apprenticeship, or let yourself become a powerful wizard, to protect your most cherished friends and family. Bylin played with the wand in his hand and continued, I'm going to give myself a 3-week special training. The process is a bit dangerous. If you want to join, I'm willing to take you along. I'll take the second one. Sir. Harry stood up abruptly. Harry slept soundly in the guest room at the Leaky Cauldron, and since he made that decision, Harry felt as if he had found the path he most wanted to take. He was fed up with being treated as an outlier by the Muggle family and couldn't resist, fed up with the wizards seeing his lightning scar and sighing that he was such a poor and lucky guy, and even fed up with Dumbledore and the Weasleys. Good man, Give him sympathy and protection. What he needs is not protection. The person he loves the most has died to protect him. This time he wants to become stronger, and he wants to protect others. When he got up early the next morning, he found that Bai Lin was already waiting for him at the restaurant. Bai Lin had just sent Fuji away. Fuji had a lot of opinions on Bai Lin, but after a while of deception, instead of pursuing Bai Lin's behavior, he gave him a withdrawal. 200 galleons were allocated for research and operations. Bai Lin knew that Fudge was not a bad person, but he was a little cowardly, and he had an inexplicable hatred for Dumbledore, but in the end he was still a good person. I hope you slept well last night, because we may not be able to sleep soundly for 2 or 3 days. Bai Lin said while eating fried eggs and roasted ham. Harry ordered a sandwich with cheese and cabbage, sat opposite Bai Lin and said, I slept well, sir, shall we set off today? I'll pack my luggage right away. Bai Lin took a sip of coffee with a smile, almost didn't spit it out, and quickly asked Tom to add half a cup of milk for him. Wizards love to drink Robusta coffee beans, which are stronger than the small Arabica coffee beans commonly used in the Muggle world. Many. You don't need to pack your luggage. We'll come back once a day or 2 soon, and we have to come back to take a good rest. Just bring your magic wand and invisibility cloak. Harry was obviously shocked. The invisibility cloak was the biggest secret of the trio of him, Hermione, and Ron, but Bai Lin didn't expect to know it. Bai Lin waved his hand and said, as I said, I know a lot of things. The invisibility cloak is your father's legacy. Keep and use it well. It is far more powerful than you can imagine. Just kidding, the invisibility cloak is one of the 3 Deathly Hallows alongside the Sorcerer's Stone and the Elder Wand, but it can even avoid the eyes of the God of Death. In contrast, the Ministry of Magic's invisibility special team is as naive as a child's playhouse. Chapter 12. Zombie Village Tour. What about you? Harry looked at Bai Lin and said, are you wearing this suit for special training? I don't think you have any luggage with you. Bai Lin snapped his fingers and put on a tight-fitting hunting suit, looking heroic. This is a convenient function that comes with the illustration book. It is a small storage space. Currently, it can only hold a few clothes, but changing clothes is quite fast. People can turn into cats and dogs these days, but the practical skill of transforming into clothes is quite novel. Obviously there is no such magic, otherwise all clothing stores would have closed down, but Harry was just envious, thinking that Bai Lin cast a high-end silent spell. After dinner, Harry brought back his wand and a small cloth bag. Bai Lin knew that it was one of the 3 most powerful props in the world of Harry Potter, but in his hands, it was probably just a task item that could not be used. The 2 went straight into Diagon Alley, walked east and west for a long time, walked past Lihen bookstore where Harry hadn't had time to buy books, past Ollivander's wand shop with a history of nearly 400 years of wand making, and finally I came to a very remote store, which was different from the prosperity of other stores. It was almost deserted. There were only a few chairs and a fireplace in the store. A bald old man about 50 years old was snoring on the counterboard. Harry looked up, and there was a line of words 59 Diagon Alley Horror Tour Company written on the shop. Harry remembered that he had been stuffed with flyers from this company when he came to Diagon Alley before, with pictures of ghosts, werewolves, vampires, zombies, etc. on them, as well as their classic advertising slogans. Want to rent a Transylvania vampire castle, looking for a zombie trail trip, face to face with the living dead, taking a cruise through the Bermuda Triangle, come to Horror Tours, we make your nightmares come true. P.S. The tour company is not responsible for any accidental death or injury. Harry didn't know if their ad was trying to attract customers or drive people away. Bai Lin took out 10 galleons and placed them on the counter of the bald wizard, who woke up suddenly. He grabbed the gold coin in his hand. At your service, dear gentleman, I am your travel consultant, Robert Oakes. The bald wizard walked up from behind the counter and said with a smile on his face. Bai Lin took out a leaflet from his pocket, pointed to the image of the zombie inside and said, no matter where you send us, the zombies must take care of them. Robert glanced at Bai Lin's attire, groped around the counter, took out a contract and said, do you need to sign a contract? 10 gold galleons are enough for a 2-day journey for the 2 of you. Adding 1 galleon can get you a demon hunter master. The gift pack, adding 5 galleons can help you recruit an experienced witcher. This made Bai Lin and Harry think it was Stan, the bus conductor. Bai Lin thought for a while. He was also quite curious about what the exorcism gift package was, so another gallon popped up. Robert caught it, took out a package from the counter and handed it to Bai Lin. Bai Lin looked at it, and there are only 3 things: a high-power magic torch, to prevent the wizard from casting some other spells when the wand is illuminated by the fluorescent flash spell, simply a flashlight, a magic rope that can automatically bind the prey, and an escape. Used smoke dust. Come on, it's only Garin, and I still expect him to give away the equipment for nothing. Robert saw that Bai Lin did not intend to sign the contract. By the way, the contract is not binding, and a large part of it is a disclaimer, because of commercial secrets. Robert invited Bai Lin and the 2 into the door, closed the door of the shop, and then before starting to cast a spell, he said a long paragraph of strange spells that even Bai Lin could not understand at all. Then Robert pointed his wand towards the fireplace, and the fireplace suddenly ignited a raging green flame. Robert said, "In 3 days' time, at 8 o'clock in the morning, I will activate apparition at the same place, and you must come back on time." Apparently, both Bai Lin and Harry used the fireplace as an apparition method for the first time, but Bai Lin felt that the character set couldn't be broken, and he had to pretend to be a veteran, so he jumped in without saying a word. Harry was indeed the best among Gryffindors. Although he was terrified, he gritted his teeth and rushed in with Bai Lin. After a while of tumbling, Bai Lin felt a little suffocated. After a while, he got out of a ball of flames. Looking around, he was already on a grassland. On the ground, there were big stones to form a very original shape. The magic circle, the center of the magic circle is a pile of bonfires made of branches. A dilapidated signboard was erected not far away. Bai Lin tidied his clothes. He thought he would have to wait for Harry for a while, because Harry had only operated for the first time in the Order of the Phoenix. He should be a little scared at this moment. Harry jumped out of the bonfire, and Bai Lin quickly supported him, only to see that his face was a little pale, and he was panting heavily. "It's okay, just come a few more times." Bai Lin comforted. Apparition is an advanced spell, and it is also under the control of the Department of Magic and Transportation. Very few underage children experience this. Harry looked better and said, "Mr. Carlin, where are we?" Bai Lin pointed to the sign in front of him and said, "Look at what's written on it." The sign clearly reads, "Zombie Village 1 mile ahead. A barrier has been applied for 5 miles around this place, please do not force through the barrier at your own risk. Please do not try to identify the geographical location, the relevant location information is owned by Horror Tour Travel Company with all intellectual property rights." Yep, that's the haunted house, or copy, made by Horror Tours. Looking at the direction of a building in the distance, Harry said, "Mr. Carlin, how should we deal with zombies?" Bai Lin looked at Harry and said, "How many attack spells do you know?" Harry blushed instantly. He was only in the 2nd year, and in fact, his elementary spell class was only average. Only an intellectual genius like Hermione could read so many garrulous and obscure spells with ease. Bai Lin was stunned for a moment, remembering that in the 1st and 2nd Harry Potter books, among the elementary spells taught by Hogwarts professors, the only slightly useful ones were the leg-locking curse and the petrification curse, so he just waved his hands and said, "Then I will take the lead. You can help me in the back. What spells do you throw? Our first lesson is to experiment, which spells are useful in actual combat." Harry took out his wand, adjusted his glasses, and nodded vigorously. Under Harry's surprised gaze, Bai Lin summoned the White Werewolf. "Be careful and protect this kid." "Hey, kid, I heard you pulled out the Sword of Gryffindor, right? Then besides learning spells, you should also read more spells. See how the sword should be used." Bai Lin pulled out the long sword he stole from Hagrid, held the sword in one hand and the wand in the other, and walked forward at a fast pace. Soon they encountered the first zombie. The original book of Harry Potter did not show the concept of zombies, but Bai Lin quickly saw the real appearance. Maybe the system had a problem with the translation of the word zombies. The walking zombies are not virus-infected zombies, but more like the image of ghouls in the game. Only then did Bai Lin remember that there is a ghoul ranger in the Department of Fantastic Beasts Management and Control of the Ministry of Magic. Should be used to deal with them. This ghoul is still in human form, but its skin is festered, exposing purple-red muscle fibers, its face is cracked, its mouth full of black fangs, its eyes are blood-red, and it is not afraid of the sun. It was lying on the grass by the side of the road. Zhong remained motionless. When he heard Bai Lin's footsteps, he rushed out from the grass, using both hands and feet, like a vicious dog, rushing towards Bai Lin. Chapter 13. Taking Harry for special training. Bai Lin turned to Harry and said, I try to only use elementary spells from the first and second grades. Watching the ghoul getting closer, Harry couldn't help holding his wand nervously. The white werewolf grinned, half in front of Harry, ready to attack at any time. But Bylin didn't mean to bother the summoned beast, and pointed at the ghoul without looking back. The legs are locked. The ghoul's forelimbs seemed to be tied by an invisible chain, and it suddenly fell forward, smashing its head on the gravel path, and broke a few teeth. Just as the ghoul got up again and opened its bloody mouth to bite Bylin, Bylin had already flashed easily, and the long sword in his right hand struck the ghoul's back, destroying the ghoul's entire central nervous system. The ghoul lay on the ground and scratched its limbs, but couldn't get up. When a ghoul is running on all fours, it can also lock its forelimbs with the leg-locking curse, and its spine is its weak point. It can be destroyed with the god's front curse. Of course, using a sword is more flexible and quicker. While sealing the ghoul, Lynn said to Harry, and he added in his heart, "If you don't believe me, I just figured it out. Lock Mot Murtis." Leg-lock curse. Harry aimed at a ghoul that was rushing from the entrance of the zombie village, and finally successfully locked the forelegs of the flying ghoul. This is his third. The first time I tried, the leg-locking spell was a bit difficult to say, and I had to aim at the moving target. The actual operation was much more difficult than imagined. He was very curious why Bylin only needed to read very short syllables, and he attributed him to the fact that Bylin had mastered the knack of spells after years of training. While explaining the skill of using the sword to exert force with his wrist, Bylin cut off the neck bone at the back of the ghoul's neck. This was purely for the purpose of not frightening the little friends with the horrible scene of blood spurting after the beheading, and immediately cleared the scene with a seal. After picking up 7 ghouls, the zombie column was successfully lit up on the blank page of the illustrated book, and Bylin was rewarded with 2 points of magic power. Bylin smiled happily. Harry thought that Bylin's smile was satisfied with the spell he cast just now, and he immediately became more confident, and Bylin didn't feel serious about him as a professor at all. Instead he was like a big brother who took him on an adventure together, which made Harry think of Ron's 2 clown brothers Fred and George, who taught Harry many mischievous spells. This is the case with children. You may not be able to read the spells you learned in class, but you will be able to listen to the prank spells once or twice. Lockermit Murtis. Harry cast another spell on a ghoul that rushed out from behind a barn, but he couldn't control his head well and didn't lock the ghoul's forelimbs, but he shouted in desperation, "The front teeth match is great." The ghoul's fangs suddenly grew, almost 1 meter long, and immediately caught his forelegs, fell to the ground, and was once again killed by Bylin's sword. Looking at the super long front teeth of the ghoul, Bylin couldn't help laughing and said, "That's right, it's also a quick wit." Harry swallowed, "Don't you blame me, sir." Bylin waved his hand and said, "Why should I blame you? A spell is just a tool. A tool is only useful or useless. If it works, it is the right spell. If one day you can subdue Voldemort with a prank spell, I'd be very happy to see it. That scene, haha. Come on, let me see what else you can do." In Grucio. Growth spell, only lasts for a short while. Harry pointed at a stone in front of a ghoul and cast the spell. After crashing to death, Bylin couldn't help giving Harry a thumbs up. The children's thinking was really broad, and they stepped forward to solve it with a sword. However, the battle between the two alarmed many ghouls in the village. Bylin didn't want to be besieged by hundreds of ghouls, and a powerful wizard was not trained in a day. On a hillside a mile away. As the sky was getting darker, Bylin took out some food like a conjuring, satiated his hunger with Harry, and said, "Do you know the secret to fighting at night?" Harry pricked up his ears, and while eating the bread, he looked at Bylin with rapt eyes. Bylin pointed to the magic torch he planted at the foot of the hill and said, "Always keep yourself in the dark and keep the enemy in the light. After eating, sleep for a while. I will watch the first half of the night, and you will watch the second half of the night." After eating the bread, Harry drank a cup of black tea diluted with water, wrapped himself in his robe, and fell asleep leaning against the tree trunk. He was extremely tired, even more tired than participating in 2 consecutive Quidditch matches, but he was very tired. "I am happy to live this kind of life. I can feel that my spells are getting smoother and the hit rate is getting higher and higher. There are also some whimsical ideas that I usually dare not use that can be put into practice. Maybe this is the feeling of becoming stronger." Bylin lit the magic torch, and the hillside was immediately illuminated. Once a ghoul approached, he could see it from a long distance. In the first half of the night, it was still quiet, only 3 ghouls came, 2 of them walked around the torch twice and left without seeing any living people, and the remaining one came up the hillside. Standing in a petrified place, stepping forward with a sword to resolve the battle, I feel that the strength of the ghouls is slightly weaker than that of the low-level werewolves in the Forbidden Forest, and now they can no longer pose any threat to Bailin. In the middle of the night, he woke up Harry and handed the long sword to Harry. Bailin took out a big earphone and put it on by himself, saying that he would not get up no matter how loud the sound was, and then fell asleep. Harry hid in the woods and stared at the bottom of the mountain. When it was dawn and Bailin stretched his waist, there were already 5 or 6 corpses of ghouls by the torch at the bottom of the mountain. Harry looked exhausted. It was obvious that the past few hours had not been easy. It took another day and night, and the two of them had almost drawn out all the ghouls in the zombie village, and played guerrilla tactics around the village, until the magical energy of both of them felt dry and could no longer be released. A spell, and no more ghouls can stand up. The apparition bonfire of Horror Tour Company was ignited on time, and the two of Bailin returned to Diagon Alley. They didn't know how Robert would react until they slaughtered the zombie village. Back at the Leaky Cauldron, the two of them had a good day's rest. Harry couldn't wait to go to Lihen bookstore and bought all the textbooks for the 3rd grade, including the book Intermediate Spells. Harry was hungry and thirsty. Sleeping and forgetting to recite the mantras in it, the energy of learning is unprecedentedly high. Coming to Horror Tour Travel Company again, Bailin chose the Vampire Castle project, but Robert insisted on asking for 50 galleons before letting them stay in the castle for 3 days. Harry rushed to buy the bill, remembering that this little guy is a small rich man, and there are tens of thousands of deposits in Gringotts. Bailin is not polite to him. Vampire Castle is a Gothic castle located in the deep mountains. Outside the castle is a dense fir forest. It is not like Europe, but a bit like Canada. The gate of the castle is closed and cannot be opened even with an unlocking spell. Lynn and Lynn had to camp outside the castle. Chapter 14. The Guardian Spell. But at night, the gate of the castle was opened without wind, as if a warm and hospitable friend was invited in. This time, the two were much more prepared. Even Harry put on some protective gear made of rawhide to prevent vampires from turning into them if they were bitten. Although the castle was not luxurious, it was cleaned very clean, as if someone came to clean it regularly, but when he walked through a porch, he saw a group of brooms and mops cleaning himself, like a group of sweeping robots, which made Bailin feel like the sense of déjà vu that magic and science lead to the same goal by different routes. However, there was no scene where the earls and nobles made their grand appearances. As soon as they entered the main hall of the castle, they encountered the attack of their first enemy. The ghost. I don't know how many curious adventurers died in the huge castle, forming vengeful spirits, hovering in the castle. Different from the friendly ghosts in Hogwarts Castle, whether it is the almost headless Nick or the crying Myrtle, they are just playing pranks, otherwise they would have been KO'd by the wizards. The ghosts in the Vampire Castle are it's more like a ghost who works for a tiger in Oriental mythology. Because he is killed by a vampire, his soul is enslaved, and in turn helps the vampire kill other adventurers. The wraiths are not as complete as the Hogwarts ghosts, they are more like the Dementors in the movie. Each of them has a terrifying shape, and they make piercing screams. Flying past the two of them, Bailin feels his whole body trembling. It's cold, and I feel that the soul level has been affected. Harry behind was even more frightened, his face was pale and his head hurt. Bailin remembered the first time Harry encountered a Dementor on a train in the original book, and almost passed out. It was because the Voldemort Horcrux in Harry's body had a strong attraction to the Dementor, so Harry was demented. Special care of ghosts. Today is a rehearsal of the attack on the Dementors. Since the Dementors are afraid of invoking the magic spell, it makes no sense that the low-matched wraiths are immune to the light power of the Guardian magic spell. Bailin stretched out his wand, pointed at the dozen or so resentful spirits flying in the air, and shouted loudly, "Call God to guard." Under Harry's adoring eyes, a golden owl appeared on Bailin's wand. It was said that Bailin used the Patroness charm for the first time, and he himself did not expect to summon his Patroness for the first time. Although the owl is only the size of a fist, chubby, and cute, it emits circles of golden light all over its body, and the golden light spreads around like ripples. All the wraiths touched by the golden light screamed in pain, and they didn't even know where to turn. Run away! Bailin was happy, but the appearance of the golden owl only lasted for less than 5 seconds before disappearing, but the wraiths in the whole hall were much dimmer. Some of the wraiths seemed to be in a coma, floating in the air. Seal, clean up the wraith. Bailin turned back and said, "Harry, the Patroness charm is very powerful, practice it carefully, it can save you in the most desperate time." Harry said yes aloud. Just after the attack of the Wraith was over, Bylin saw the vampire in the world of Harry Potter, but Bylin was quite disappointed in this appearance. He thought he would meet the powerful, changeable, and elegant figure in the Van Helsing movie, Count Dracula. But the real vampire leans out from a dark corner, but feels much more desolate, with eyes much larger than ordinary people, pointed and long ears, pale face, white teeth, and different shapes, some with arms, some are longer, and some have wings on their backs. Harry swallowed. It was much scarier than the pictures in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, but after experiencing the Battle of Ghouls, Harry had seen the world, and Bylin was standing in front of it leisurely. Harry plucked up his courage and stepped forward to stand side by side with Bylin. Bylin nodded to Harry and said, "Very good, try all the newly learned spells. I think the petrification spell is very good against vampires." Harry gripped his wand tightly, feeling power all over him. 3 weeks passed in a blink of an eye, and school would start soon, and a large number of Hogwarts students flooded into Diagon Alley. Harry, who just came back from the 3rd special training place Devil's Swamp, was exhausted and his feet were heavy. Along the way, he met many Gryffindor classmates, Mo, Dean, Neville. He casually called say hello. Until he passed the Quidditch boutique, he was attracted by the most magnificent broom he had ever seen in his life on the counter, and he couldn't move any more. "Firebolts," the shopkeeper was fussing in front of the window, "this is a hot item. The Irish International Club placed an order a few days ago, and they want to buy 7 at a time. This World Cup will definitely shine." Next to the firebolt, there is a sign introducing the broom, which is written in a hype, but the final price is negotiable. Harry swallowed. He loved the broom, but his Nimbus 2000 was fast enough and never cost him a single match. Change the broom, and then have to plead with the Dursleys for tuition next semester. "I'll order one." A voice came from Harry's side. When Harry turned his head, it was Bylin. He poured out a pile of galleons from his wallet, which caused a burst of exclamation from the passers-by. "You are, Mr. Callan." The shopkeeper obviously recognized the upstart from the Ministry of Magic, and quickly counted galleons. "Exactly 200 galleons, Mr. Callan, this broom is all handmade, and the delivery date is in about 2 months. We will settle the balance with you upon delivery, and it will cost about 500 to 600 galleons, do you think it is okay?" Bylin waved his hand and said, "I hope you won't make me wait too long." The shopkeeper gave Bylin a magic receipt with a happy smile. Harry was speechless at the price of the broom, and cast an envious look at Bylin. Bylin shrugged and said, "You will have one too, and it's still in stock. Let's go." Hermione and Ron should have rushed to the Leaky Cauldron. Sure enough, as soon as the two walked to the ice cream shop, they saw Hermione and Ron walking from the direction of the Leaky Cauldron with their bulging bags on their backs. "Harry! Harry!" Ron waved happily, his freckles were so conspicuous in the sun, and Hermione was also quite tanned. The 3 good friends got together happily, and Ron said, "I've heard about you, how did you get to Diagon Alley?" Harry hurriedly introduced Bylin to them and said, "I haven't had time to introduce him yet. This is Mr. Kylan, and he is our assistant professor in the new semester. Mr. Kylan, this is my good friend, Hercules from Gryffindor. Min Granger and Ron Weasley." Only then did Hermione and Ron turn their attention to behind Harry, the young gentleman who was taking 4 luxury-grade ice creams from the ice cream shop. His handsome appearance even made Hermione blush, and she immediately regretted it. "Why am I so tanned? Mr. Carlin! It's really you!" Ron's reaction was bigger than Hermione's, and he jumped up with joy. Chapter 15. The Mouse and the Big Cat. Am I famous?" Bylin was a little puzzled, why people often recognize him at a glance recently, and suddenly thought of a possibility. Maybe the illustrated book system was given to prevent an unknown person from suddenly becoming a powerful wizard. The impact of information brought by the magic world may be slowly correcting the popularity of his identity. Sure enough, Ron took out a large number of wizard cards from his pocket, took out one of them, handed it to Bylin, and said, "Mr. Carlin, can you give me an autograph?" Bylin took a look. "Good guy, the wizard card has his own photo on it, and there is an introduction on the back. The most famous master of magical animals after Master Newt, he is passionate about the research and protection of magical creatures, and even created an original combination, the summoning of magical creatures and many Chinese spells. Some people say that he is the strongest among the young wizards and currently works for the Ministry of Magic." "Whoa! This evaluation is not low," Bylin said in his heart. In this way, he summoned werewolves or mandrakes in front of many wizards, and he would no longer shock the world when he uttered Chinese spells. This is also an adjustment for the system to rationalize the illustrated book. Bai Lin took out a quill. By the way, Catherine added a lot of convenient functions to this suit, and wrote the word Bai Lin on the card. You are from the East. This is Bai Lin. Hermione leaned over, looked at Bai Lin's signature and said, obviously Hermione, who was too energetic, had also learned some Chinese. Bai Lin glanced at Ron's pet Banban from the corner of his eye, and said lightly, have you finished shopping for the new semester? Ron happily took out his new wand and the monster book in the package. When I said we wanted to, the clerk almost cried. Harry saw Hermione's 3 bulging book bags and asked, what are these things? Hermione said casually, I just took a few more courses, Harry, are you already preparing for the new semester? Hermione unceremoniously pulled out Harry's bag, which had been flipped through by Harry. I opened the wrinkled intermediate spells level, and saw a lot of notes written inside. Hermione was a little nervous at once, and she couldn't help asking herself, is it too stupid for me to bask in the sun in France this summer vacation? Even Harry, who is very easygoing, knows how to preview the lessons, and it seems that he has mastered all the third-year spells. It's almost done. After leaving my aunt's house, Mr. Kelling took me to do some training. Harry took the textbook back from Hermione's hand and stuffed it back into his book bag. Hermione secretly made up her mind that she must work harder, and Ron asked, is there anything else to buy? Hermione looked at her wallet and said, I still have 10 galleons. My birthday is in September. Mom and Dad gave me some money to buy myself a birthday present in advance. How about buying a good book? Ron pretended to be kind. No, I don't want to buy books, Hermione said calmly, I really want an owl. Does Mr. Carlin have any suggestions? Hermione looked at Bai Lin shyly. While eating ice cream, Bai Lin didn't expect Hermione to ask him, but following the plot as his magic weapon, he quickly pointed to the Fantastic Beasts shop across the street and said, why don't you go to the Fantastic Beasts shop across the street? Well, I think your mouse doesn't feel well, so you can go and have a look. Bai Lin pointed to the mouse's head protruding from Ron's pocket. Of course Bai Lin knows that Banban is Peter Pettigrew, but although Peter seems to be of average strength in the original book, Bai Lin knows that Peter is actually a very powerful wizard. This can be learned from many sources. First, he is a Death Eater. Open and shut the Avada Kedavra curse, Voldemort will not accept the weak as his younger brother. Second, he once blew up half a street in front of Sirius Brian, and he also retreated, blaming Black, proving that he is at least no better than Black weak, but Black is a very strong wizard. Based on a comprehensive assessment, Bai Lin is not sure that he can get Peter right now, so he follows the plot and returns to Hogwarts. Bai Lin doesn't believe that Peter can escape from his grasp. The four happily entered the Fantastic Beasts store. The place inside is very small, and the walls are densely covered with cages. There is a smell in the air, and the sound is noisy, because the guys in the cages are screaming, or other strange noises. The witch behind the counter is selling a large purple toad to a wizard. There are so many types of animals in the Fantastic Beasts shop, and Bai Lin is quite greedy to see them. Although most of them are low-level creatures of level 1-2, if they are all sealed, they can at least provide Bai Lin with 3-5 points of magic power, but the price it's not cheap. Any level 2 jewel tortoise will cost 40 galleons. Ron immediately handed the witch a hand and said, my mouse, since I brought it back from Egypt, its color is a bit wrong. The witch asked Ron to put scabbers on the counter, and began to ask this and that pretending to be concerned, and finally went back to sell some other animals. Hermione saw a big ginger cat in the store at a glance. It was a pure-blooded orange cat, like the Ewan Devourer in Captain Marvel. At this time, the big cat was looking at Bai Lin from the highest cage. Bai Lin, before I came to the magic world, I had raised a British short-haired cat. He was very good at cats. In addition, the magic creature affinity +3 given to him by the illustrated book was extended. After a little greeting, the big cat jumped out of the cage and landed in Bai Lin's hands. Bai Lin stroked the hair on its chest, and it closed its eyes very comfortably. This big cat had a very fierce face, but it turned into Hello Kitty in Bai Lin's hands. Bai Lin suddenly thought that maybe Hermione liked its ferocity and stopped stroking his fur, but cleverly let it see Ron spotted. As if activated, the big cat jumped out of Bai Lin's arms, and went straight to Banban. Banban slipped away from the hand of the witch, who was about to drip the rat booster on it like a piece of soap, and fled away from the magic beast like a fly. Shop! Ron hurriedly pulled Harry and chased him out. Sure enough, Hermione took a fancy to the big cat named Crookshanks, and Ron and Harry finally found Scabbers under the cardboard box in front of the Quidditch boutique. Ron and Hermione bickered as they walked, and the four happily returned to the leaky cauldron. From afar, Mr. Weasley was watching the Daily Prophet at the bar. When he saw Bailyn, he was obviously startled, and got up to meet him. "You are, Mr. Kelling." Mr. Weasley offered his right hand. Bailyn shook hands with Mr. Weasley very politely. They both work in the Ministry of Magic. Mr. Weasley is still the director of the Misuse of Muggle Items office, but Mr. Weasley seems to respect him very much. "Dad, Mr. Kylan is our assistant professor in the new semester," Ron said excitedly. "Yes, Mr. Weasley, Mr. Kylan's summoning skills are really strong, and of course his Chinese spells are also very strong," Harry said excitedly. Bailyn and Mr. Weasley had a few polite words, and finally talked about Sirius. Mr. Weasley pulled Bailyn aside, and let Mrs. Weasley and Ron's brothers and sisters who had just come down the stairs reunite with Harry. "Mr. Kelling, Brian is still at large and may go to Hogwarts. If it is convenient, please take care of the children," Mr. Weasley said. Bailyn nodded and said, "This new semester will be very uneven. Black is not a big deal. I heard that many bounty wizards have poured into Hogsmeade. The bounty offered by the Ministry of Magic is quite attractive. I am not worried about it. But the Dementors of Azkaban may have had an impact on teaching at Hogwarts." Mr. Weasley turned pale, obviously startled. "What? Dementors will go to Hogwarts? The children will be terrified." Bailyn looked into Weasley's eyes and said, "I will protect the children from the Dementors, but I really want to know how to kill them completely. Dementors are far more dangerous and evil creatures than Black." Mr. Weasley swallowed and said, "Don't provoke them, Mr. Kellan. If you are touched by a Dementor's kiss, you will lose your soul and become a living corpse." Chapter 16. The Dementor Attacks. The next morning, the shop owner Tom woke everyone up with hot tea as usual. Harry was still tossing with the temper tantrum Hedwig, and Ron was still arguing with Percy, who had just been promoted to the president of the Boys' Union. Exci's promotion made him haughty like a proud rooster, but the three younger brothers did not spoil him, and played tricks on him every day. Chaos before departure, with everyone feeling like their stuff wasn't packed, and Ron arguing with Hermione about whether Crookshanks should be kept in a cage. For the safety of the children, Mr. Weasley called a special car from the Ministry of Magic to take Harry and the others to King's Cross Station. The process was uneventful, but Harry didn't see Bailyn early in the morning, so he was a little disappointed. Bailyn arrived at the station a few hours earlier than them, and after waiting for half an hour, he finally saw a familiar figure from the newly arrived train. Hagrid was wearing his brown jacket, waving to him in the last carriage. Hagrid briefly introduced the situation at Hogwarts. Although Dumbledore hated Dementors very much, he was forced to accept the double pressure from Azkaban and the Ministry of Magic to allow Dementors to enter Hogwarts. The entrance to prevent Sirius Black from entering. And the real Sirius, the big black dog, had already arrived at Hagrid's hut, waiting for Bailyn and Harry to meet him day and night. "When I came out in the carriage, I saw Dementors from afar. It was too scary, that cold feeling. I think they are more fierce than what I saw in Azkaban," Hagrid said. Bailyn thought, in the original book, Harry summoned the stag, the patron saint, and drove away hundreds of Dementors in the entire forest with his third-year magic power. This is obviously unreasonable. The author did not to explain, it is an accidental burst of ability, but if the Dementors are really so weak, then the person who can call the magic spell will not be imprisoned, and as far as I know, the magic spell is simply a low-level spell. It should be everyone will. Hagrid said, "Ms. Pants asked me to tell you that she searched the entire library, but she couldn't find a way to kill the Dementors completely. On the contrary, there are many cases of being brutally tortured by Dementors, especially the terrible ones. With the kiss of a Dementor, the person who is kissed will lose his soul and become a vegetative body." Bailyn said thoughtfully, "I have a guess. I need to test it." It didn't take long for the Weasleys, Harry and Hermione to arrive at platform 9 3/4, and they saw the Whitelin and the huge Hagrid from afar. The Weasleys greeted Hagrid for a while. Mrs. Weasley was very kind to Hagrid. They used to be classmates, but Hagrid was expelled from school because of the Myrtle incident. He learned that he was a new member of the Protection of Fantastic Beasts class. "Professor, everyone is very happy. And Hermione kept sneaking glances at Bylin, her eyes shining brightly, until Ron came again and asked not to share the same carriage with Hermione, so as to avoid Crookshanks hurting his scabbers. Of course Hermione gave him a big white eye. With Bylin and Hagrid escorting the children to school, the Weasleys felt relieved, and sent them to the train without repeatedly urging Harry. After getting on the train, Ron seemed to have forgotten what he said just now. Naturally, the three friends got together. Harry, who got on the train, was obviously worried. He overheard their conversation outside the door of Mr. and Mrs. Weasley last night. After quarreling, knowing that Sirius Black is very likely to come to him, and that the legendary Dementors will guard Hogwarts like a prison, Hogsmeade Village should never even think about it. Harry took Hermione and Ron to the last carriage, and was about to tell them about Sirius, when he happened to see Bylin chatting with Professor Lupin, who was dressed a little poorly, and Bylin was holding a large book in his hand. Tome. Ron looked at Bylin and swallowed. He had never seen such a handsome and famous wizard as the teacher of Hogwarts. In comparison, the other professors were more weird than the other. Gryffindor girls will be screaming for him. Ron thought wryly. Bylin enthusiastically introduced Lupin to everyone. Although Lupin was a little poor and his status was embarrassing, he was a rare powerful wizard with both kindness and strength. The three little guys chatted for a long time, and soon at noon, the sky outside the train turned cloudy, and it rained heavily after a while. Hagrid brought a sumptuous assortment of food and treats from the house elves in the castle kitchen, and instantly compared the food Mrs. Weasley had prepared for Ron and Harry, but Hermione saw Bylin didn't look at her all the time. He was eating his crucible-shaped cake alone, a little sullen. Professor Lupin was surprisingly humorous, and he and Bylin quickly became friends. The two chatted while eating, which made the last carriage quite lively. Malfoy, with his two dog legs, looked for Harry and Ron everywhere, wanting to find something to entertain him, but when he saw them in the same carriage with several professors, he left somewhat resentfully. Suddenly, Ron asked a little shyly, "Mr. Casey, can you ask Professor McGonagall to approve Harry to go to Hogsmeade with us? Harry's birthday present seems to be broken, we want to send it to Hogsmeade for repair." Speaking of which, Harry pitifully took out the pocket-looking glass that was still whistling, and Bylin and Lupin suddenly felt a dangerous approach, and they became serious. "Harry, draw out your wand and get ready to fight!" Bylin shouted as he pulled out his wand. The train slowed down significantly, the sound of the wheels gradually disappeared, and the sound of wind and rain hit the window louder than before. Ron thought that the train was coming to a stop, so he moved to the window excitedly, but it was pitch black outside. Although it was only 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky was as dark as midnight. Harry was the closest to the door, and he was about to stand up and look into the aisle, but Bylin walked to the aisle door between the carriages first, with a serious look on his face. Lupin and Hagrid also nervously took out their wands. Harry glanced at Ron and Hermione and stood in front of them. Seeing the appearance of the four of them, Ron and Hermione obviously felt that something was unusual, and were about to ask something, when the train came to a halt with a thud, and there was a sound of ping-pong-pong in the distance, and the luggage fell from the shelf on time. Immediately afterwards, for no reason, all the lights went out, and they fell into complete darkness. There was a sudden chaos in the carriage, with collisions and screams of pain everywhere, and it was obvious that the children were fumbling and running around causing injuries. "Quiet!" Lupin said in his hoarse voice, and there was a slight crack of his wand, and a quivering light lit up the box like a torch, illuminating his tired grey face, and his eyes were alert. "Swafeng, clear the field!" Bylin summoned the white werewolf. He named it Swafeng, and Swafeng roared to drive away the students in the penultimate carriage, leaving a spacious fighting space. Lupin was obviously taken aback when he saw Bylin's call, but he didn't say anything, he just put a big question mark on Bylin in his heart. Bylin wasn't sure if a Dementor could pass through the wall of the car like a ghost, but soon a window on the side opened, and a huge figure in a black-grey cloak got into the car through the window and stood in front of everyone. "Dementors," Lupin whispered. Bylin licked his lips. Chapter 17. The First Confrontation. Harry stared at the gigantic figure, whose face was completely hidden under the hood, and Harry glanced down to see something that made his stomach twitch, a greyish-white, an arm covered in spots and slime, like a half-decomposed corpse in water. If he hadn't gone through a month of special training, Harry might have been scared to death on the spot. Sensing everyone's stares, the Dementor turned its head towards them and made a strange rattling sound. Suddenly, everyone felt a biting chill swept over them, and everyone felt suddenly out of breath. The chill penetrated into their skin, chest, heart. Lupin gritted his teeth and growled, "Call God to guard." His wand suddenly glowed with a dazzling silver light. The Dementor was visibly startled, and retreated a few steps in the silver light of Lupin's incantation, not daring to approach it, and let out some angry screams. The strange screams reached the ears of Harry and the others, as if they were stabbed in their ears with a knife, and they covered their ears one after another. Ron and Hermione squatted on the ground unbearably, but Harry gritted his teeth and raised his wand shout, "Call God to guard." Lupin was a little surprised that Harry could call the spell, and then he found that Harry had an amazing talent for this spell, and the silver light on the wand was no less than his own. Unexpectedly, Dementors are not like ghosts that can pass through walls and objects, but more like creatures with entities. Bailin wanted to test the effects of various elemental magics. Fire is raging. Bailin pointed to the Dementor's robe, a spark flashed on the robe, and then disappeared immediately. Yes, the blazing curse is invalid. Ice arrow. Bailin followed up with a frost curse, and the Dementor waved his hand angrily, and the energy of the ice was completely absorbed by it. All petrified. Bailin dared not approach in the golden light, relying on the Dementor, one spell after another. Shenfeng Wuying. 10,000 bullets. Bailin used all the offensive spells he knew, shouting a little dry, but he didn't cause any damage to the Dementor. You can't hurt Dementors, they are almost immune to offensive spells, don't use the 3 unforgivable spells on them, they will bounce back. Lupin's face was a little pale, and he supported the invocation spell to let him bear the burden. Some heavy. First of all, Harry's magic power was exhausted, and his invoking spell could only last for less than 1 minute. As the silver light on the wand became weaker and weaker, the incantation had no effect. At this time, he still couldn't summon the patroness, but in Lupin's eyes, he was already shocked. Lupin felt miserable. He didn't want to confront the Dementors head-on. Apart from knowing that incantations could effectively disperse the Dementors, he had nothing to do with them. He just wanted to get rid of the Dementors as soon as possible. In the carriage, Bailin was clearly trying to irritate the Dementors. As the silver light of Lupin's wand dimmed, the carriage was pitch black again. Suddenly everyone saw that the Dementor was emitting a gloomy light green light. Not only did the light not make everyone feel bright, but it made everyone feel more terrifying and permeating. The face of the Dementor was like a half-rotten mummy, with the pitch-black 2 miserable green flames also lit up in his eye holes. Since the spell is useless, let's try a physical attack. With a wave of Bailin's hand, Swafeng has rushed over from behind. The night vision ability of the wolves is much better than that of humans. It has been waiting behind the Dementors. After seeing Bailin's order, he grabbed the Dementor's back with his long claws without hesitation. And Bailin drew out his long sword, flew up, and stabbed the Dementor's chest with his sword. The Dementor is far more sensitive than it looks. Swafeng's wolf claws grabbed the cloak on its back, like grabbing a piece of weightless paper. The Dementor slid aside, while Bailin his long sword only pierced the corner of the Dementor's clothes, without the feeling of piercing the real thing at all. The Dementor rushed towards Bailin, but was blocked by the snow wind, and bit the Dementor's neck. The Dementors seemed to hate Swafeng very much, they dodged left and right, and did not release their specialty emotional capture on Swafeng. Anyone who has watched the Harry Potter movies knows that those who are approached by a Dementor will be sucked away by the Dementor, leaving only emotions such as sadness and depression, so they are sucked by the Dementor. Harry was depressed for a long time. But Dementors obviously can't use emotional intake on animals, which is why Brian can escape from Azkaban smoothly after becoming a big dog. Swafeng couldn't hurt the Dementors, and the Dementors couldn't hurt Swafeng, and Swafeng's huge body blocked 7 or 8 out of 10 passages, and the Dementors couldn't get through for a long time. Finally, the Dementor took advantage of the snow wind to block one side, and quickly moved to the other side to get in, but what greeted him was Bailin's long sword, which stabbed straight at its head. Suddenly, Bailin clearly felt the Dementor's figure become lighter, and then his long sword pierced the air. At that moment, the Dementor seemed to transform from a solid body into a ghostly incorporeal body, completely avoiding the long sword. Physical attack. Bailin's sword missed, and he couldn't help jumping forward. He was being greeted by the disgusting face of the Dementor. Bailin felt as if he had fallen into a hole in the ice. The extreme cold made his limbs stiff and unable to move. Swafeng froze, his summoning spell failed, and he was abruptly withdrawn from the system. No, be careful of the Dementor's kiss. Lu Ping turned pale in shock, and rushed forward to rescue Bai Lin, but the Dementor raised his head and screamed, and Bai Lin could clearly see that part of Liu Ping's emotions had been captured. The ghost sucked it away. Lupin let out a scream, his body froze, and he quickly supported the back of the chair next to him. "Don't hurt Professor Kellen." Harry jumped up from the ground and shouted loudly, "Call God to guard." His wand turned silver again, and that silver light began to form a misty shape. But the Dementor had already grabbed Bai Lin, flew to the other side of the carriage, and pressed Bai Lin against the opposite carriage wall. The face of Bai Lin and the Dementor was very close. The Dementor lifted its hood, and smiled sinisterly at Bai Lin like a skeleton with rotting flesh. A black hole opened where the mouth should have been, facing Bai Lin. When I got closer, it was the legendary Dementor's kiss. The Dementor's kiss is the deadliest weapon of the Dementors, equal to killing. When the Dementor takes off the hood and sucks the soul of the kissed person, although the kissed person's brain and heart are still working, he can live without a soul, but he no longer has self-awareness, no longer has memories, no more, anything, and no hope of recovery, just alive. An empty shell. A soul lost is gone forever. At this very moment, Bai Lin roared with all his might. He already felt the pain of being torn apart at the level of his soul, but at the same time he also felt that in order to release the Dementor's kiss, the Dementor entered a different state, that is, it was not when it was attacked by force. Incorporeal bodies are not entities that are immune to magic attacks, but more like this is their original state. Chapter 18. The First Drop of Blood. Hagrid rushed out from the darkness, raised his pink umbrella, and shouted, "Call God to guard." He waited nervously for a long time in the carriage, waiting for this moment. Bai Lin told him, "There is no perfect and invincible creature in the world. Dementors must have their weaknesses. If the Dementor's kiss is its strongest point, it must be accompanied by its weakest side." Hagrid's umbrella emitted a dazzling silver light, and the silver light swayed into silver ripples. When the ripples touched the Dementor was startled, because it felt severe pain, as if sulfuric acid was splashed on his body. The skin made a slightly burning sound, and white smoke rose. Bai Lin felt that his hands and feet were loose, and there was no delay. He stretched out his hand in front of the Dementor and shouted, "Guardian!" Under the surprised eyes of everyone, he also summoned his patron saint, a golden owl, and the next scene made everyone's jaws drop. Bai Lin grabbed the golden owl and stuffed it into the Dementor's mouth without saying a word, while cursing, "I'll let you suck it. I'll let you suck it up." All the Dementors were in pain, but it seemed that there was a mouthful of magma in his mouth, and he couldn't spit it out. He could only fly around in the car in pain, and his whole body was covered in pain from the inside to the outside under the curse of the two of them. "Be burned." Bai Lin pointed at the flying Dementors and said, "Use buff magic on him." Everyone. Hagrid was the first to realize that although he was huge, his magic was unambiguous. He shouted, "Episki!" Healed as before, and released it at the Dementor. Lupin, Harry, and the others were stunned for a moment, and didn't understand Bai Lin's meaning for a while, but they immediately understood, because the healing energy emitted by Hagrid was like a grenade, and a big gap was blown in the Dementor's body alive. Harry yelled, "Resuscitate quickly!" It was a restoration curse on the Dementor. Hermione also got up from the ground and cast a restoring curse on the Dementor. When Hagrid released the third healing, Bai Lin clearly felt that the Dementor was very weak. How could he be polite, and directly took out the summoning illustration book, aiming at the Dementor was the seal. In front of everyone, the Dementor was like being burned by a fire, turned into fly ash, and disappeared into the air. The patroness charms of Bai Lin and Hagrid also dissipated, and the carriage fell into darkness again. But Bai Lin's summoning illustration clearly shows. Successfully complete First Blood, Hogwarts contribution plus 200, activate Quartermaster Edison after arriving at Hogwarts. The total score for completing the illustrated book, 1452, the magic bonus of the illustrated book, 34, the affinity for magical creatures, plus 4, summoned beasts, white werewolf, level 3, screaming mandrake, level 1, blessing of the mermaid, level 3. Coming out of the Forbidden Forest was plus 16, and the 3-week special training added 15 points. Today, just one Dementor added a full 3 points of magic power, and Bai Lin couldn't help but feel hooked. Bai Lin, Strength 15, Magic Power 49, Young Wizard, I hope you can find a job in the ice cream shop in Diagon Alley. As usual, there is an extra sentence in the illustration book to complain about him, without mercy. But in fact, 49 points of magic power is already a very good level. After a while, amidst everyone's cheers, the lights on the train came on, the floor trembled slightly, and the Hogwarts Express started moving again. Students, look at me, I look at you, no one can describe what just happened. Malfoy hid behind the door and said to the two dogs, they are finished, dare to kill a Dementor, Azkaban will not let them go. Bylin's ears were sharp, and he said coolly to the students hiding in the front compartment, as we all know, Dementors cannot be killed. We just dispersed them. It's all right now. Everyone, go to your seat and do your best. Harry and Hermione were still in shock. Ron protected Ginny and hid in the corner, comforting the frightened Ginny at this time. Lupin looked at Harry's still strong face, took out a large piece of chocolate from his pocket, broke off a few pieces, stepped forward and handed a large piece to Ron and said, give this to the little girl, there will be helpful. Hermione was obviously very excited, grabbed Harry and said, did you see, we defeated a Dementor. You know what a Dementor is? Harry once again gave Bylin admiring gazes. This young wizard, not only a few years older than them, not only dared to use himself as bait to experience the terrifying kiss of the Dementor, but also beat the Dementor to death in one fell swoop. I am afraid that this scene will be written into the history of wizards. He also took the chocolate from Lupin and stuffed it into his mouth. He never expected that he would have such great courage and strength. You'd better give me an explanation. Liu Ping sat down beside Bylin with a gloomy face and said, you clearly know that the Dementors are only here to search the carriages, looking for Black, and just use the Patronus charm to drive them away. Why insist on taking the risk to kill it? Use this unheard of method. Bylin neatly put away his long sword and wand, straightened his sleeves and said, as we all know, I study and protect magical animals, but I only protect animals that are not hostile to wizards and muggles. Dementors are some of the most brutal, terrifying and evil creatures in the world, and the chances of encountering a solitary Dementor are so low that I can't pass up the chance. Liu Ping was obviously taken aback by what he said, and Bylin continued, now I know how to kill a Dementor. With all due respect, Professor Liu Ping, an important lesson in your defense against the dark arts class is to teach how do students deal with Dementors, don't they? Lupin choked when Bylin asked. Bylin smiled slightly, sat next to Hagrid, and continued to enjoy the food. While eating the turkey leg, Hagrid muttered that he used himself as bait to test the weakness of Dementors. Fortunately, it succeeded, otherwise the consequences would be disastrous. The children ate the chocolate and were amazed to feel a sudden rush of heat to the tips of their toes and fingers. The cold feeling of the Dementor coming in just now slowly subsided, and Ginny was much better, and Ron sent her to Percy's compartment. For the rest of the journey, they didn't speak much, and the car in front was still whispering about whether killing a Dementor was a crime or not. Finally the train stopped at Hogsmeade Station, everyone got off the train, and the scene was chaotic. All kinds of pets made all kinds of calls, the small platform was freezing cold, and the heavy rain was still pouring down. First years, this way! Hagrid yelled, walking quickly to the other side of the platform. He still had the task of calling the panicked first years over to cross the lake in the traditional way. Hagrid waved to the three little ones from a distance, and then led the freshmen to the pier by the lake in the rain, while Lupin, Bylin, and the others led the senior students to a rough and muddy path outside. Harry saw more than 100 carriages pulled by black Thestrals. Only those who had seen death could see them. Last year Harry couldn't see Thestrals, and he thought the carriages would fly into the sky by themselves. Chapter 19. Trouble or Reward? There was a faint musty and straw smell in the carriage, but everyone obviously didn't notice it. The topic on the train continued, first discussing why there were Dementors boarding the train, and then why some people took the initiative to challenge them. Then in the back compartment, the students swore that they were authentic, and saw an extremely handsome wizard, and all guessed whether it was a student or the new teacher of the academy. The carriage drove towards the two magnificent college gates. There were huge stone pillars on both sides of the gates, and on the top of the pillars there were some funny carvings of wild boars with wings, but what was not funny was that Harry saw two grim Dementors in black hats stood guard at the door, one on each side. Immediately, a host of chills and uncomfortable feelings came over him. He clenched his wand tightly, and Hermione, who was sitting by the side, quickly held him down. Although everyone miraculously defeated a Dementor on the train, you don't want to face them alone, do you? Finally, the carriage wobbled to a stop, and the students got out one after another. When Harry jumped out of the carriage, Malfoy walked towards him. How dare you murder a Dementor, the Ministry of Magic will definitely imprison you in Azkaban. Malfoy cursed viciously. I heard that you were so frightened that you hid in Fred's car. Ron sarcastically said. Aha, the person who is crying in the corner with his sister in his arms is ashamed to say that he is a member of Gryffindor. Gryffindor is known for its courage, Malfoy retorted, and the two dogs on the side also stepped forward a few times. If Ron dared to speak again, he might be beaten directly. Is there any trouble? Said a gentle voice, as Professor Lupin and Bai Lin got off from another carriage. Malfoy stared at Professor Lupin arrogantly, seeing the patch on his robe and the dilapidated box, but then he saw Bai Lin's half-smile expression, and suddenly felt a chill down his spine. I have often heard his father talk about the deeds of a young wizard named Kylan White. It is not an exaggeration to describe him as powerful and ruthless. He is the youngest wizard with an independent card. What is more difficult is that he is still a mysterious and powerful family member. Malfoy swallowed and said, No, Professor. I was just joking with them. Bai Lin didn't bother to talk to this kid, and said to Harry, Come on, the sorting ceremony is about to begin. The door of the auditorium was open, and Harry followed the crowd towards it, and just glanced at the cloud-enclosed magic ceiling, when he heard the vice-headmaster, Professor McGonagall, shouting, Karen, Lupin. Come to my office. Bai Lin and Lu Ping looked at each other, shrugged, and followed the old lady to her office. I wanted to call Harry and Hermione, but you two got into big trouble. Professor McGonagall was obviously still thinking about what language to use to tell them the seriousness of the matter. Bai Lin waved his hand and said, Now that the Dementors know that they will also be killed, I think this is good news for Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic. Maybe I can write an article for the dissertation. The Ministry of Magic rewarded me with 1,000 galleons, and maybe Hogwarts can promote me to be a full-time professor. Professor McGonagall's eyes flickered and said, The Ministry of Magic already knows. The reason why it didn't bother you is that it is still evaluating the impact of your actions. Bai Lin pretended to be serious and said, The name of the thesis is 3-year students can kill Dementors as long as they master the method. Lu Ping, who was originally very serious, couldn't help laughing out loud. Professor McGonagall glared at Lupin, and Bai Lin walked to Professor McGonagall, pleadingly, Professor McGonagall, we are about to miss the new teacher's inauguration ceremony. Professor McGonagall was choked alive in one breath. At this time, the auditorium was filled with a sea of pointed black hats, and every long college table was full of students. Thousands of candles floating above the table made their faces sparkle, and they really missed it. The sorting ceremony, as little Professor Flitwick was moving an antique hat and a 3-legged stool out of the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall took Bai Lin and Lupin to the faculty's dining table in strides. Many students were shocked by Bai Lin's handsome face and forgot to celebrate the new students joining their college. When Dumbledore saw Bai Lin, his eyes paused. He couldn't understand Bai Lin, but this was not enough to make him regard Bai Lin as an enemy. He still believed that Bai Lin was in the camp of kindness, just as he believed Lupin on the side is average. Although Dumbledore is old, he is full of energy. He is an idol in the hearts of the students and staff of the academy. He is also the greatest wizard in many people's hearts today. He can always give people a sense of security, including the students watching him after the Dementor at the door. Welcome! Cried Dumbledore, his long beard gleaming in the candlelight, Welcome back to Hogwarts. I have a few things to tell you, and one of them is very important. He introduced the Dementors guarding the entrance of the college with a serious tone, and repeatedly warned anyone not to give the Dementors a reason to hurt them, and emphasized that the invisibility cloak is invalid, excuses and begging for mercy are invalid, and the Dementors are very don't act alone. If you are in a group, no matter how powerful a wizard is, there is no way to retreat unscathed. Bai Lin yawned. Let's change the subject to something more pleasant. Dumbledore continued, I am delighted to welcome 3 new teachers to our lineup this term. First of all, it's Professor Lupin, the new teacher of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Lupin immediately stood up and motioned to everyone. Seeing Lupin's poor attire, the auditorium thought of cold and sparse applause. Only Harry, Hermione, and Ron were applauding vigorously. On the train, Lupin showed the bravery and justice that a teacher should have. And gentle, has made them very respected. There was another person who was very unhappy, of course, Snape, who seemed to have eaten 100 flies in his stomach. Both Harry and Ron were very happy to see his depressed and even hateful expression. Snape had been eyeing the Defense Against the Dark Arts class all along, but who knew that Lupin had his beard cut off, and when he learned that they had teamed up to defeat the Dementors on the train, he didn't think the Dementors would die. At this point Snape couldn't even do it, he felt that this wish was hard to come true. As for our protection of magical creatures class, I'm sorry to tell you that Professor Bourne retired last semester, but I'm happy to announce that his position is about to be filled by an old acquaintance of yours, Rubeus Hagrid. He has agreed to accept the teaching position in addition to his gamekeeper duties, and, of course, his assistant professor, Mr. Kellen White. Chapter 20 is assigned to Hufflepuff. Fred pretended to wipe away his tears and said, Hogwarts finally hired a handsome guy as a teacher. I used to think that to become a teacher, you must first be a weirdo, so I have been working hard. Except for Harry, Hermione, and Ron didn't expect that Hagrid and Baelin were their teachers in the protection of Fantastic Beasts class, and then they applauded with everyone. The applause was exceptionally warm and unexpected, and the girls at the Slytherin and Hufflepuff tables were also particularly crazy. Just like Fred lamented, it was the first time for the girls to see a young and handsome male teacher. Other male teachers were either poker-faced, Snape, or an old pedant, Flitwick, or a psycho, Filch. Harry first looked at Baelin with bright eyes, and then turned to Hagrid. He saw that Hagrid blushed and was wiping his eyes with a tablecloth. For Hagrid, being a teacher at Hogwarts meant a lot. Extraordinary, he was once expelled from Hogwarts for an unfounded charge, involving the killing of Myrtle, in the 3rd year, and was only cleared of charges by Harry and others in the Chamber of Secrets incident. His current inauguration symbolizes his officially back at Hogwarts. Okay, that's all for the important things, let's have a banquet, Dumbledore said happily. Immediately, food and drinks slowly appeared on the golden plates and goblets in front of everyone. The difference is that most of the students' glasses are fruit juices, while the teacher's table is full of mellow wine. It was really a warm feast. The auditorium echoed with laughter from various colleges. Everyone kept looking at Baelin optimistically, secretly discussing the earth-shaking changes in the new semester. Baelin and Dumbledore also toasted frequently. Dumbledore would not refuse anyone who came, and finally the last dish disappeared. Dumbledore announced that everyone was going back to their respective colleges to go to bed. The three had no choice but to come to Hagrid's side to congratulate him warmly. Harry also walked up to Baelin and said, "Welcome to Hogwarts, thank you." Baelin patted Harry on the shoulder and said, "You have always been great, believe in yourself, and I am very happy to be your teacher." Hagrid was about to burst into tears, but Professor McGonagall came over to chase them away mercilessly, and everyone left with a smile on their face. The semester has officially started, and Baelin doesn't have to live in Hagrid's hut anymore, but Dumbledore insists on assigning Baelin to Hufflepuff House, the Badger House that represents integrity, kindness, and honesty, and most of the students are mediocre nice guy, instead of going to Gryffindor with Harry and the others. Although Baelin was quite reluctant, the Hufflepuff students were very happy. A group of senior students surrounded Baelin, and they sang the team song of the Hufflepuff team as they walked. Although the melody was simple. Jolly though, they walked down the passage to the house elf kitchen to their dormitory. At the same time, in the Gryffindor dormitory, Harry was lying comfortably on his bed, feeling that he was finally home. Hermione was still full of thoughts of Baelin, but the two quickly shook off heads, each took out the books from the package, and studied some magic knowledge while the lights were on. The next morning, Baelin walked into the auditorium full of energy for breakfast. The house elves at Hogwarts are amazing, almost comparable to Baelin's mother. Of course, their Western-style barbecue and pastries are even better. It's a unique skill, not limited to it. If he could go back, Baelin would like to kidnap a house elf back to the real world. From a distance, he saw Malfoy playing tricks on Harry every day, but Harry didn't give him a good face. He bumped his shoulder with a tall Slytherin student without fear, and then pulled out his wand with a stern expression, with the look of Hermione was frightened by the appearance of doing something, and quickly pulled Harry away. From a distance, Ron could be heard muttering, "Why did you drag us away? We can beat Malfoy into a pig's head." "What a beautiful youth, isn't it?" Baelin smiled and said to Professor Lu Ping, who was sitting opposite. Lupin used to be a member of the Predators group of troublemakers at Hogwarts. He made troubles a lot when he was a student, and he seemed to think of his own youth, so he couldn't help smiling meaningfully at Baelin. "Here, the schedules for the protection of magical beasts class for each grade." Lupin handed a schedule to Baelinier at this time. A good-looking senior girl mustered up the courage to step forward, stuffed an envelope for Baelin, and then ran away blushing. "Oh, please." Lupin obviously didn't want to enjoy dog food at close range. In fact, only Harry's father was the one who was able to embrace the beauty of their troublesome foursome. Everyone at Harry's table is still discussing why Dementors and Hermione have registered for so many courses, and then they will face their first divination class. Bylin has met Professor Trelawney. Although she looks a bit ugly, the dress is even more neurotic, but it turned out to be a man with a magic power of 78, but it is estimated that such a good qualification is used to open the Tianmu. There are only 3 successful prophecies in the whole book, and most of the time she is like a crazy charlatan. In the afternoon, there was the first protection class of magical beasts. Bylin said goodbye to Lu Ping politely. Hagrid's cabin. Hagrid's hut was quite lively in the morning. Buckbeak was chasing and fighting with the Hound Fang in the open space, and the big ginger cat, Crookshanks, and a big black dog were walking back and forth restlessly under the eaves. Hagrid should have gone fishing in the Black Lake at this time, so that Buckbeak could be more obedient in class in the afternoon. This was a perfect opportunity. The big black dog saw Bylin from a distance, jumped onto the stone pier next to the hut, and looked at Bylin fiercely. Bylin asked the big dog to look at his magic wand, which was still stuck in the lining of his clothes, and expressed that he was not hostile. He pulled the wooden door, and it was unlocked, so he let the big dog in. Bylin unceremoniously poured 2 cups of black tea, said, "Blake, let's talk." Then he pointed to the chair opposite to the big dog. The big black dog growled at Bylin, and Bylin spread out his hands and said, "Sirius is an unregistered animagus, and I can clearly draw his animal image. With this alone, I can get a bounty of at least 3,000 galleons, so let's not waste time, shall we? We don't have much time for Harry, for killing Voldemort completely." Hearing Harry's name, the big black dog bared its fangs ferociously, but soon calmed down and began to change. Under Bylin's admiration, the big black dog turned into a pale, thin man with messy hair and a yellow beard. It was Sirius Black. "Kellen White. An employee of the Ministry of Magic, what are your intentions?" Black held his wand and pointed it at Bylin. Bylin glanced at Black's magic power, 62 points, it should be after 12 years of living in Azkaban, his magic power did not increase but decreased, and after he experienced special training and Dementors, his magic power was already 49 points, plus the fast casting of Chinese spells. It is not necessarily lost to Black.